The kingdom whispered his name like a curse spoken behind locked doors. Duke Cale Dravenmore stood alone in the throne room of Ravenspire Keep, surrounded by enemies wearing the masks of allies, his empire crumbling not from external warfare, but from the poison of betrayal seeping through every corridor of power he had built with blood and iron. The most dangerous predator in the north had finally been cornered, and the entire aristocracy held its breath, waiting to see if the Beast Duke would break or burn the world trying to survive. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what happens next will shatter everything you thought you knew about power, love, and the price of absolute dominion. Drop a like if you're watching from your city, and let me know in the comments where you're experiencing this tale of destruction and devotion. The northern wind carried salt and ash across the cliffs of Ravenspire on the morning everything changed. Cale Dravenmore stood at the window of his private study, watching the gray dawn break over a sea that had witnessed 5 years of his absolute rule. His reflection in the rain-streaked glass showed a man who had forgotten how to sleep without nightmares, whose dark eyes carried the weight of every decision that had transformed him from a grieving son into the most feared nobleman in Verith. He was 32 years old and had already killed more men than he could remember. The Beast Duke, they called him, a title earned not through cruelty for its own sake, but through the cold mathematics of survival, in a world where mercy got you buried before your enemies even bothered to lie about why. Cale had learned that lesson watching his father's corpse swing from the castle walls after a rival house had manufactured treason charges so elegant that even the king had believed them. He had been 27 then, young enough to still believe in justice, old enough to understand it was a fairy tale told by winners. So he had become something worse than his father's killers. He had become efficient. 5 years of consolidating power through fear, strategic marriages brokered for other noble families while keeping himself untouchable, and a network of spies so thorough that he knew what his enemies ate for breakfast before they did. Ravenspire Keep had transformed from a crumbling ancestral fortress into the beating heart of northern authority, its black stone towers rising like accusations against the sky. Every noble house in the territory understood the reality. You either bent to Cale Dravenmore or you disappeared. There was no third option. Cale turned from the window as his military advisor entered without knocking. Captain Theron Cross was the only man in Ravenspire who still treated the Duke like a human being instead of a walking execution order, which made him either brave or suicidal depending on the day. "Theron, what is it?" The captain's weathered face carried bad news like it always did lately. "My lord, the Royal Council has sent another summons. Third one this month. They want you in the capital within the fortnight." Cale moved to the massive oak desk that dominated the study, its surface covered with maps, ledgers, and reports from informants across the kingdom. He did not sit. Standing kept you ready for violence, and violence was the only language politics truly spoke. "Let me guess," he said. "They want to discuss my growing influence in the northern territories, my interference with the king's trade policies, my refusal to attend the last 4 royal assemblies." Theron nodded. "All of that. Plus rumors about your military buildup. The king's advisors think you're preparing for rebellion." "The king's advisors are terrified I am building something they cannot control," Cale corrected. "There is a difference. Rebellion requires wanting the throne. I just want them to leave the north alone." "My lord, with respect, they will never leave you alone. You have too much power, too much independence. The crown sees you as a threat. Then the crown should have thought about that before they let corruption rot the entire kingdom from the inside out," Cale said, his voice dropping to the dangerous quiet that made seasoned soldiers nervous. "I did not create this situation, Theron. I simply refused to pretend it did not exist." He picked up a sealed letter from the desk, one that had arrived by courier 3 days ago from a contact inside the royal treasury. The contents had confirmed what Cale had suspected for months. The king's inner circle was not just corrupt. They were actively embezzling funds meant for infrastructure and defense, using the money to finance private armies and purchase loyalty from lesser nobles. The kingdom was being gutted by the very people sworn to protect it, and Cale Dravenmore had documentation proving every single transaction. "Do you know what happens when you collect evidence against powerful men?" he asked Theron, not really expecting an answer. "They do not simply confess and resign. They escalate. They manufacture crises. They find someone dangerous enough to blame and destroy him before the truth becomes public. You think they will move against you directly?" "I think they already have," Cale said. "We just have not seen the blade yet." He was right. The blade arrived 6 hours later in the form of a prisoner transport bearing royal seals and an escort of crown soldiers. Kael watched from the battlements as the convoy approached through the rain, his instincts screaming warnings that his rational mind struggled to interpret. The Royal Council did not send prisoners to Ravenspire. They sent demands, threats, occasionally assassins disguised as diplomats, but never prisoners. Theron joined him on the wall. "My lord, the captain of the escort is asking for an immediate audience. He says he carries orders directly from the king." Kael studied the convoy below. 20 soldiers, one reinforced transport carriage, and an atmosphere of tension so thick he could taste it like copper on his tongue. "Bring him to the throne room," Kael said, "and double the guard presence. If this is a trap, I want enough steel in that chamber to turn it into a slaughterhouse." The throne room of Ravenspire Keep was designed to intimidate. High vaulted ceilings lost in shadow. Massive pillars carved with the history of House Dravenmore, including the dark years when Kael's ancestors had held the north through blood feuds and winter warfare. The throne itself was a brutal thing, iron and black stone, built for war rather than ceremony. Kael sat in it now, watching the royal escort captain approach across the polished floor. The man was professional, mid-40s, the kind of career soldier who had stopped questioning orders years ago and just executed them with mechanical precision. "Your Grace," the captain began, stopping at the proper distance and executing a bow that managed to be both respectful and completely empty of actual deference. "I bring orders from His Majesty and the Royal Council." He produced a sealed scroll bearing the king's mark. Kael did not move to take it. "Read it aloud, Captain. I want witnesses to whatever insanity you have delivered to my home." The captain hesitated, then broke the seal. "By order of His Majesty King Aldrich Vareth and the assembled Royal Council, Duke Kael Dravenmore is hereby commanded to accept wardship and guardianship of Lady Seraphina Vale, daughter of the late Lord Cassius Vale, recently executed for high treason against the crown. Lady Vale has been remanded to your custody for a period of no less than 6 months, during which time she is to be held under house arrest at Ravenspire Keep, while further investigations into her family's treasonous activities are conducted." The silence that followed could have shattered glass. Kael leaned forward slowly, his expression unchanged, but his mind racing through implications like a chess master seeing 12 moves ahead. Cassius Vale had been a minor aristocrat, influential enough to have connections, but not powerful enough to threaten anyone significant. His execution 3 months ago had been barely noticed outside the capital's gossip circles. Except Kael noticed everything. And now the Royal Council was dumping the man's daughter in his lap like a political grenade with the pin already pulled. "Tell me, Captain," Kael said quietly, "why would the king send a disgraced noblewoman to the most dangerous territory in the kingdom instead of keeping her imprisoned in the capital where she could be properly monitored?" The captain's jaw tightened. "I am a soldier, Your Grace. I deliver orders. I do not interpret policy." "Of course not," Kael murmured. "Because if you interpreted policy, you might realize you are delivering leverage to the one duke powerful enough to challenge the crown directly. You might understand that sending me Lady Vale is either a test of my loyalty or an attempt to manufacture evidence of treason by associating me with a condemned bloodline." "Your Grace, I am simply following orders." Kael rose from the throne, descending the steps until he stood close enough to see the fear the captain was trying to hide behind military discipline. Everyone who came to Ravenspire eventually showed fear. It was the only honest emotion politics allowed. "Bring her in," Kael ordered. "Let me see what weapon the crown thinks they have given me." The throne room doors opened again, and 2 soldiers escorted a woman in chains across the floor. Lady Seraphina Vale was not what Kael expected. She was thin, obviously underfed from months of imprisonment, her dark hair tangled and unwashed, her clothing the simple gray shift of a convicted criminal. Bruises shadowed her wrists where the manacles had rubbed skin raw. Everything about her appearance screamed victim, broken noble, political prisoner meant to invoke either pity or disgust. Except her eyes. Seraphina Vale looked at Kael Dravenmore with the kind of defiance that usually got people killed before they finished the expression. Not rage, not fear, just absolute refusal to bend. She reached the center of the throne room and stopped. The soldiers moved to force her to kneel. "Do not," Kael said, his voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. "If she wants to stand, let her stand." The soldiers stepped back, confused. Seraphina remained upright, Her gaze locked on Kale with an intensity that felt like a challenge. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse from disuse but carried an edge that made it clear imprisonment had not broken whatever core of steel lived inside her. "So you are the Beast Duke," she said. "The monster of the North. The man who crushes enemies and rules through terror. I expected someone taller." The throne room went absolutely silent. Theron moved his hand toward his sword hilt. The royal soldiers looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. No one spoke to Duke Cale Dravenmore like that. No one insulted him in his own throne room and expected to survive the conversation. Cale stared at her for a long moment. Then, against every instinct of political theater and dominance that had kept him alive for 5 years, he laughed. Not a pleasant laugh. A sound like breaking glass. "You have courage, Lady Vale," he said. "Suicidal courage, but courage nonetheless. Tell me, did they send you here hoping I would kill you and give the crown an excuse to move against me? Or are you genuinely this reckless by nature?" Seraphina's expression did not change. "They sent me here because I am a problem they could not solve with execution. My father died in prison before they could stage a proper trial. I survived. Dead martyrs are dangerous. But disgraced noble daughters shipped off to remote territories are easily forgotten. You think you are being buried alive. I think I am being erased," she corrected. "There is a difference." Kyle descended the final steps until he stood directly in front of her, close enough to see the exhaustion in her face, the defiance barely holding together against what must have been months of torture disguised as legal proceedings. He had seen that look before in mirrors during his own dark years. "Why did they really execute your father?" he asked quietly, pitching his voice low enough that only she could hear. Seraphina met his gaze without flinching, because he discovered something the royal council wanted buried deeper than any grave. And when he tried to expose it, they destroyed him. "And what about you, Lady Vale? What did you discover?" Her lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. Everything. Kale felt something shift in the political geometry of the moment. The royal council had made a mistake. They thought they were dumping a problem in his lap, creating complications that would force him to either comply with their authority or destroy evidence they could later use against him. But what they had actually done was give him an ally who hated them as much as he did. He turned to the royal escort captain. "Tell the king his orders have been received and will be obeyed. Lady Vale will remain at Ravenspire Keep under my supervision for the designated period. You and your men are dismissed." The captain looked relieved to escape. "Your Grace," he said, executing another empty bow before retreating with his soldiers. The throne room doors closed. Kyle looked at Theron. "Remove her chains. Assign her guest quarters in the East Wing. Post guards outside her chambers, but treat her as a ward, not a prisoner." "My lord," Theron said carefully, "is that wise? We do not know if she can be trusted." Kyle's gaze returned to Seraphina, who was watching him with wary calculation. "Trust is irrelevant, Captain. She is here whether I want her or not. The question is whether I turn her into an enemy by treating her like a criminal or see what she knows that scared the royal council badly enough to murder her father." He stepped closer to Seraphina again. "You will not be imprisoned here, Lady Vale. But understand this clearly. Ravenspire operates under my law, which is simpler and considerably harsher than whatever political games you survived in the capital. You attempt to escape, you die. You betray me to the crown, you die. You endanger anyone under my protection, you die." Seraphina held his stare. "And if I simply want to survive and find out who really killed my father, then we might have common ground," Kyle said. "Because I have been collecting evidence about the royal council's corruption for over a year, and I suspect your father discovered the same conspiracy that has been bleeding this kingdom dry from the inside out." For the first time since entering Ravenspire, Seraphina's defiant mask cracked slightly, revealing exhaustion and grief underneath. "They murdered him," she said quietly. "Made it look like suicide in his cell. But I saw the marks on his body when they let me view the corpse. He fought. He fought hard." Kale felt an unexpected surge of rage on behalf of a man he had never met. The kind of anger that came from recognizing your own trauma reflected in someone else's story. His father had fought too, before they hanged him. Everyone fought before the system crushed them. "Theron," Kale said without looking away from Seraphina, "take her to her quarters. Make sure she has food, clean water, and whatever she needs. We will talk more tomorrow after she is rested." As Seraphina was led away, she looked back once. "Thank you," she said, the words clearly difficult for her. Kael did not respond. Gratitude was dangerous. It created debts. And he had learned long ago that debts between desperate people became chains faster than any manacle forged from iron. After the throne room emptied, Kael returned to his study and poured a glass of whiskey he did not drink. He just held it, staring at the amber liquid while his mind worked through the implications of what had just happened. The royal council had sent him Seraphina Vale for a reason. Either they genuinely believed she was harmless and wanted her forgotten, or this was a sophisticated trap designed to give them justification for moving against him when he inevitably failed to control a dangerous prisoner. But there was a third possibility they had not considered. What if Seraphina Vale was not a liability, but a weapon pointed at the crown itself? What if her father had discovered the same evidence Kael had been quietly collecting, and between the two of them, they had enough documentation to bring down half the royal council? What if the king's advisors had just made the single dumbest political decision of their careers by putting the two most dangerous people in the kingdom under the same roof? Kael set down the untouched whiskey and pulled out the hidden ledger he kept locked in his desk. Years of careful investigation, names, transactions, proof of embezzlement running into amounts that could have funded entire armies. He had been waiting for the right moment to use this information, knowing that moving too early would get him killed and moving too late would make him complicit. But now he had an advantage the royal council did not expect. He had someone who hated them enough to burn the world, proving their guilt. The next 3 days at Ravenspire passed in careful observation. Kael did not summon Seraphina to formal meetings or interrogate her about her father's discoveries. Instead, he watched how she moved through the castle, how she interacted with servants, how she carried herself despite obvious exhaustion and trauma. She was not broken. Beaten, yes. Grieving, absolutely. But underneath the visible damage lived a mind that refused to stop calculating survival strategies. On the fourth morning, Kael found her in the castle library, a vast chamber filled with centuries of collected knowledge that most of his predecessors had ignored in favor of warfare and political maneuvering. Seraphina sat at a reading table surrounded by books about royal succession law, trade agreements, and historical precedents for noble house dissolutions. She looked up as he entered. "Researching your legal options for getting rid of me, Your Grace." Kael closed the library door behind him. "If I wanted to be rid of you, Lady Vale, you would already be gone. I'm curious what you are researching." She gestured to the books. "Trying to understand the legal framework they used to destroy my family. My father was executed under an obscure treason statute that has not been invoked in over 70 years. The charges were vague enough to be unprovable, but specific enough to bypass normal trial protections. They used law as a weapon. They used law as camouflage," Seraphina corrected. "The real weapons were lies, forged documents, and witnesses who mysteriously died before they could recant testimony." Kael moved to the table and sat across from her, a casual gesture that clearly surprised her. Important people in her experience probably did not sit with disgraced prisoners as equals. "Tell me about your father," he said. "Not the official story, the truth." Seraphina's hands tightened around the book she was holding. "He was a good man, not perfect, not particularly ambitious, but good. He worked in the royal treasury for 15 years, managing agricultural subsidy distributions. Boring work, the kind of position that never draws attention, until he found something." Her eyes met his. "Until he noticed discrepancies in the ledgers, money being moved through shell accounts, payments to mercenary companies that did not officially exist. He thought it was simple corruption at first. Embezzlement, maybe a few corrupt officials skimming funds. But it was larger, much larger," Seraphina said. "He discovered that several members of the Royal Council have been systematically looting the treasury for over a decade, not just stealing money, but weaponizing it, funding private armies, purchasing noble loyalty, building a parallel power structure that answers to them instead of the crown." Kael felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. "Your father tried to expose them. He went to the king directly," Seraphina said bitterly. "He thought His Majesty would want to know his own council was betraying him. Instead, my father was arrested within hours, charged with treason, thrown into a cell where he conveniently died before anyone could hear his testimony. And you. They kept me alive as insurance," she said. "If anyone started asking questions about my father's death, they could produce me as evidence that the family was being treated mercifully. A disgraced daughter sent to a remote territory instead of executed. Proof of the crown's compassion." Kael leaned back in his chair, studying her. You are telling me this very freely for someone who does not know if I am part of the conspiracy. Seraphina's smile held no warmth. I have been watching you, Your Grace. How you run Ravenspire. How your people talk about you when they think no one important is listening. You are brutal, yes, probably cruel when necessary. But you are not a liar. Everyone says the same thing about the Beast Duke. He never makes promises he cannot keep, never pretends mercy while planning betrayal. You are a monster, but an honest one. That is supposed to be a compliment. It is a tactical assessment, she corrected. If you were part of the conspiracy, I would already be dead. The fact that I am sitting here researching legal precedents instead of rotting in a dungeon tells me you are exactly what the Royal Council fears. Someone powerful enough to challenge them who is not already corrupted. Kael felt something dangerous stirring in his chest. Not quite trust. Not yet. But recognition. The kind that happened when two people who had survived similar hells realized they spoke the same language of damage and survival. What evidence did your father collect before they killed him? He asked. Seraphina reached into the bodice of her dress and pulled out a small waterproofed packet. Documentation he smuggled to me the day before his arrest. Names, account numbers, transaction records. Not enough to prove everything, but enough to start asking the right questions. She slid the packet across the table. Kael did not touch it immediately. If I take that, Lady Vale, we are no longer simply ward and guardian. We become conspirators. The Royal Council will see any alliance between us as proof of treason. Good, Seraphina said coldly, because I want them to see me coming before I destroy every single person who murdered my father. Kael picked up the packet and opened it. Inside were carefully copied ledger entries, witness statements, and a list of noble names that made his blood run cold, because half of them matched the evidence he had been collecting independently. Between them, they had enough proof to bring down the entire Royal Council. The question was whether they would survive long enough to use it. He looked up at Seraphina. If we do this, there is no going back. The crown will come for both of us with everything they have. We will be labeled traitors, hunted. If we fail, we die. If we do nothing, she said quietly, the kingdom continues rotting from the inside, while evil men profit from suffering. My father died trying to stop that. I will not dishonor his memory by choosing safety over justice. Kael felt something shift in his carefully constructed armor. For 5 years he had ruled through fear and isolation, trusting no one, building power as a shield against the world that had murdered his father. He had become the Beast Duke because monsters survived where good men died. But sitting across from Seraphina Vale, seeing the same rage and grief he carried reflected in her eyes, he realized isolation had its own cost. Some wars could not be fought alone. We start tomorrow, he said. I will show you everything I have collected. We compare evidence, build a case airtight enough that even the king cannot ignore it. Then we decide how to move. Seraphina nodded, and in the meantime, Kael said, standing, you learn how to survive in Ravenspire. The Royal Council is not the only threat we face. The northern territories are filled with noble houses that would love to see me fall. If they sense weakness, they will move. You need to learn how to navigate politics at this level. I survived months in a royal prison, Your Grace. I think I can handle northern nobles. Kael's expression turned darker. Prison is simple, Lady Vale. You endure and hope to survive. Politics is warfare where everyone smiles while plotting your murder. The enemies here wear silk and speak in poetry while sharpening knives behind their backs. It is a different kind of brutality. Then teach me, she said, standing to face him. Teach me how to become dangerous enough that they fear me the way they fear you. For the first time in years, Kael Dravenmore felt something other than cold calculation. Not warmth exactly, but possibility. The sense that maybe, just maybe, he did not have to burn the world alone. Careful, Lady Vale, he said quietly. You might not like what you become. Seraphina's smile was sharp as broken glass. Your Grace, after what they did to my father, I'm already something they should fear. I just need someone to show me how to use it. The alliance was born in that moment. Not trust, not friendship, but mutual recognition that sometimes the only way to survive monsters was to become something worse. Over the following weeks, Ravenspire transformed from a fortress into a war room. Kael and Seraphina worked through evidence laid into every night, cross-referencing her father's discoveries with his own investigation. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. It was not just embezzlement. The Royal Council had been systematically dismantling royal authority for over a decade, positioning themselves to control succession when the aging king finally died. They were planning a coup disguised as legitimate governance, and anyone who discovered the truth ended up dead. But evidence alone would not be enough. They needed witnesses, allies, a way to present their findings that could not be dismissed as the ravings of a disgraced noblewoman and a power-hungry duke. The problem was time. Kael's network of informants began reporting increased Royal Council activity. Secret meetings, unusual troop movements, his name appearing in encrypted communications with concerning frequency. The crown was preparing to move against him. One night, Kael found Serafina standing alone on the battlements, watching the sea crash against the cliffs below Ravenspire. The wind tore at her hair and clothing, but she did not move, just stared at the violent water like she was searching for answers in the foam. He approached carefully. Serafina had changed during her weeks at the keep. She had gained back weight, her bruises had faded, and the exhaustion had lifted from her features. But something harder had emerged underneath, a focus that reminded Kael uncomfortably of himself. "Cannot sleep?" he asked. She did not turn. "I keep seeing my father's face. The last time I visited him in that cell, he told me to be strong, to survive whatever came next. I think he knew they were going to kill him." Kael moved to stand beside her. "My father told me something similar before they hanged him. He said the world was full of men who would smile while destroying you, and the only protection was becoming harder than their cruelty." "Did you believe him?" "No," Kael admitted. "Not until I watched him die and realized mercy was just another word for weakness in a system designed by predators." Serafina finally looked at him. "Do you regret it, becoming what you are?" The question hung between them like a challenge. "Every day," Kael said quietly, "and not at all. I regret what the world forced me to become, but I do not regret surviving. Guilt is a luxury for people who have the privilege of staying innocent." "We are going to destroy them," Serafina said. "Not just expose the conspiracy, destroy everyone involved." "Yes, even if it costs us everything." Kael met her gaze. "Especially if it costs us everything, because the alternative is letting them win. And I have spent 5 years refusing to give evil men that satisfaction." Serafina turned fully toward him, and in the torchlight from the battlements, Kael saw something in her expression that made his carefully controlled heart stutter. Not attraction, though that existed too in ways he was determinedly ignoring, but recognition, the kind of understanding that happened between people who had walked through the same darkness and emerged willing to burn the world rather than kneel to it. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not treating me like a victim, for seeing me as an ally instead of a problem to manage." "You are the most dangerous person the Royal Council could have sent me," Kael said. "They just did not realize it yet." "Neither did you when I first arrived." "No," he agreed. "I thought you were bait in a trap. Now I think you might be the trap itself, and I am grateful for it." Something shifted between them in that moment. Not romance. Something far more dangerous. Partnership forged in mutual rage and grief. The kind of alliance that either saved kingdoms or burned them to ash. Neither noticed the figure watching from the shadows below. One of Kael's own servants, recently bribed by crown agents to monitor the Duke's activities and report anything suspicious. Like a disgraced noblewoman and the beast Duke growing far too close, far too quickly. The report would reach the capital within 3 days, and the Royal Council would finally have the justification they needed to eliminate Duke Kael Dravenmore permanently. The messenger arrived at dawn 1 week later. Not a royal courier this time. One of Kael's own spies, bleeding from wounds he had sustained escaping the capital. Theron brought the man directly to Kael's study, where Serafina was already working through another set of ledgers. The spy collapsed into a chair. "My lord, the council is moving. They have convinced the king you are plotting rebellion. Arrest warrants have been issued. An army is being mobilized to march on Ravenspire within the month." Kael felt ice slide through his veins. "On what evidence?" "Your relationship with Lady Vale," the spy gasped. "They claim you are building an alliance with a convicted traitor's daughter, that you plan to use her family's grievances as justification for raising the North against the crown." "It is a lie," Serafina said sharply. "Of course it is a lie," the spy said. "But they have witnesses, servants who will testify they saw you working together late at night, guards who will claim you are lovers plotting treason. They have built an entire narrative. Kale slammed his hand on the desk hard enough to make the wood crack. They are manufacturing evidence because we got too close to the truth. They cannot afford to let us expose the conspiracy, so they are striking first. What do we do? Serafina asked. Kale looked at her, then at Theron, then at the bleeding spy who had risked everything to bring this warning. Every choice led to bloodshed now. If they ran, they looked guilty. If they stayed, they would be arrested and executed before any evidence could surface. Unless they went on the offense first. We have one option, Kale said quietly. We take everything we have collected, every piece of evidence, every witness statement, and we deliver it directly to the king before the royal council can arrest us. We force a public confrontation where they cannot simply make us disappear. That is suicide, Theron said. The moment you set foot in the capital, they will kill you. They will try, Kyle corrected, which is why we do not go quietly. We bring an armed escort. We demand a public audience. We turn it into a spectacle they cannot control. Serafina stood. I am coming with you. Absolutely not, Kale said immediately. If this fails, you need to survive to finish what we started. If this fails, we both die regardless, she shot back. They will hunt me down the moment you are gone. At least together we have a chance. Kale wanted to argue, wanted to protect her from what was coming, but looking into her eyes, he saw the same determination that had kept him alive through 5 years of political warfare. She was right. Some battles had to be fought side by side. Fine, he said, but understand this clearly. The moment we leave Ravenspire, we become targets. The Royal Council will throw everything they have at stopping us from reaching the king. This will be the most dangerous thing either of us has ever done. Serafina's smile was cold as winter. Good. I am tired of being afraid. Let them come. The preparations took 3 days. Kyle assembled his most loyal soldiers, filled wagons with documentation, and sent coded messages to every noble house in the north that he had leverage over. If the crown was going to move against him, he wanted the entire kingdom watching. On the morning of departure, Kyle stood in his private chambers staring at the armor he had not worn since becoming duke. Black steel edged in silver, built for war rather than ceremony. He had sworn he would never wear it again, never return to the battlefield that had forged him into something monstrous. But some promises were meant to be broken. Serafina found him there. She wore traveling clothes borrowed from the castle stores, practical rather than noble, her hair pulled back severely from a face that had lost all softness over the past weeks. Are you ready? She asked. No, Kyle admitted, but that has never stopped me before. She moved closer, close enough that he could see the fear she was hiding beneath determination. We might die doing this. Probably, he agreed. Then I want you to know something, Serafina said. Before I came to Ravenspire, I thought I understood what strength looked like. I thought it was my father refusing to recant his testimony, even as they tortured him. But watching you these past weeks, I realized strength is not just enduring suffering. It is choosing to fight even when the odds are impossible. Kyle felt something crack in the armor he had built around his heart. That is not strength, Lady Vale. That is just stubbornness and rage. Then I am grateful for your stubbornness, she said quietly, because it reminded me I am allowed to be angry instead of just afraid. They stood in silence for a moment, two broken people about to walk into certain death for the slim chance of justice. Then Kyle did something he had not allowed himself in 5 years. He reached out and took her hand, not as a duke claiming a subject, not as protection or possession, just as one damaged survivor reaching for another. Whatever happens in the capital, he said, you do not face it alone. Serafina squeezed his hand once. Neither do you. The convoy left Ravenspire at dawn. 50 mounted soldiers surrounding wagons filled with evidence and 2 people who had become far more dangerous together than the Royal Council had ever anticipated. They rode toward the capital knowing that within days, the kingdom would either burn or be reborn. And somewhere in the royal palace, Chancellor Mordrin read the intelligence reports about Duke Cale Dravenmore's departure and smiled, because the Beast Duke had finally made the mistake he had been waiting for. He had left his fortress and walked directly into the trap. The road to the capital stretched through valleys that had witnessed centuries of noble blood spilled for power, and Kyle felt every mile like a countdown to execution. His convoy moved with military precision, 50 soldiers riding in formation around the wagons containing enough evidence to dismantle the Royal Council. But precision meant nothing against the political machinery already grinding toward his destruction. He sat his horse at the front of the column, armor catching the gray morning light, and tried not to think about how many brilliant tacticians had ridden this same road, believing they could outmaneuver corruption, only to end up decorating the palace walls with their heads. Serafina rode beside him, her borrowed cloak doing nothing to hide the tension in her shoulders. She had barely spoken since they left Ravenspire, her gaze fixed on the horizon like she could see the trap waiting ahead if she just looked hard enough. "You are thinking too loudly," Kael said without looking at her. "I am thinking that we are riding toward people who murdered my father and made it look legal," she replied. "That seems like an appropriate time for loud thinking." "Fair point." They rode in silence for another mile before Serafina spoke again. "Tell me something, Your Grace. When you decided to become the Beast Duke, to rule through fear instead of whatever you were before, did you ever worry you would lose yourself completely?" Kael considered the question. It was the kind of philosophical inquiry that normally irritated him, because philosophy was a luxury for people who did not have enemies actively plotting their murder. But coming from Serafina, after everything they had survived together, it felt less like academic curiosity and more like a survivor trying to map the terrain of damage. "Every single day," he admitted. "I worried I would wake up one morning and realize the monster I was pretending to be had eaten whatever decent man I used to be. That the brutality would stop being a strategy and become who I actually was. And did it? I do not know," Kael said honestly. "Some days I think I am still pretending. Other days I threaten to have men flayed alive for minor disrespect and feel absolutely nothing. The line between performance and reality got blurred somewhere along the way." "But you still choose mercy sometimes," Serafina said. "You did not have to treat me like an ally. You could have locked me in a cell and ignored me." "Mercy is not the same as kindness," Kael corrected. "I treated you like an ally because it was strategically useful, because your evidence combined with mine gave us leverage. Do not mistake calculated cooperation for compassion." "I think you are lying," Serafina said quietly. "I think you want people to believe you are completely ruthless because it is safer than admitting you still have principles worth dying for." Kael finally looked at her. "You are dangerously perceptive, Lady Vale." "I had good teachers," she said. "My father taught me to see past what powerful men wanted me to believe and look for what they were trying to hide. Right now, you're trying very hard to hide the fact that you are terrified." "Of course I am terrified," Kael snapped. "Only idiots and madmen ride toward certain death without fear. The trick is not eliminating fear. It is refusing to let it make your decisions." "Then what is making your decisions?" "Rage," Kael said simply. "Pure, undiluted rage at a system so corrupt that honest men die in prison while monsters wear crowns. I am riding toward the capital because staying silent makes me complicit, and I would rather burn alive than spend one more day pretending the kingdom is not rotting from the inside out." Serafina smiled, and it was the saddest expression Kael had ever seen on a human face. "My father said almost exactly those words the day before they arrested him." "Then your father understood what I am only now learning," Kael said. "That some fights are not about winning. They are about refusing to let evil operate without consequence." The first assassination attempt came 3 days into their journey. They were passing through a narrow valley where the road cut between steep hillsides covered in dense forest. Perfect ambush terrain. Kael had known it was coming the moment they entered the approach, his military instinct screaming warnings that made his skin crawl. He raised his hand to signal the column to halt. Theron moved his horse alongside. "My lord, we should keep moving. This valley is a death trap if anyone wants to hit us." "They are already here," Kael said quietly. "Look at the tree line. Birds should be making noise this time of morning. Listen to how silent it is." The captain went pale. "Archers. At least 30, Kael estimated. Probably more. They want to hit us from elevation while we are trapped in the valley floor. We need to turn back." Kael shook his head. "If we retreat, they will follow and hit us in open ground where we have even less cover. The only direction is forward. That is suicide." "No," Kael corrected. "That is battlefield mathematics. We are dead if we stay. Dead if we retreat. At least forward gives us the chance to break through their position." He turned to address the soldiers. "Listen carefully. We are about to be attacked by crown forces disguised as bandits. When the arrows start, shields up and ride hard. Do not stop for wounded. Do not engage unless you have clear targets. Our only objective is reaching the far end of this valley alive." One of the younger soldiers, barely 20, raised his hand. "My lord, How do you know they are Crown forces? Because bandits would have already attacked hoping for quick loot, Kael said. Professional soldiers wait for the perfect killing moment. These men are being patient. That means they are being paid. The first arrow came screaming out of the tree line and punched through a soldier's throat before anyone could react. Then the sky went dark with shafts. Kael spurred his horse forward, roaring commands as chaos erupted around him. Shields clattered up, horses screamed, men died with arrows sprouting from necks and chests and backs. The convoy fragmented immediately, survival instinct overriding formation discipline as soldiers scattered looking for any cover that did not exist. Serafina stayed close to Kael, her horse galloping beside his while death fell from the hillsides. An arrow grazed her shoulder and she did not even flinch, just kept riding with the same focused intensity that had defined her since arriving at Ravenspire. "The wagons!" she shouted over the chaos. "We cannot lose the evidence." Kael looked back and saw two of the supply wagons already burning, their drivers dead in the road, while archers targeted anything that looked important. Everything they had collected. Every piece of documentation proving the Royal Council's conspiracy, going up in flames while men died trying to protect it. He made a decision that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. "Leave them," he commanded. "Protect the people, not the cargo. We can rebuild evidence. We cannot rebuild lives." Theron looked at him like he had lost his mind. "My lord, without that documentation, we have nothing to present to the king. Then we will present testimony instead," Kael snarled. "Now move before I lose my entire command in this God's forsaken valley." The breakout was brutal. They lost 18 soldiers in the first 5 minutes and another dozen in the running battle that followed as they fought clear of the ambush zone. By the time they reached open ground on the far side of the valley, Kael's convoy had been cut nearly in half, and every scrap of physical evidence they had collected was either burning or captured. They regrouped in a clearing 2 miles from the killing ground. Wounded men slumped against trees while field medics worked frantically. Serafina sat on a log with blood running down her shoulder from the arrow graze, her hands shaking with adrenaline crash. Kael dismounted and immediately moved to her. "Let me see." "It is nothing," she said. "Just a scratch. You're bleeding." "So are you," she pointed out, gesturing to the gash across his forearm where a blade had caught him during the chaos. Kael looked down at his arm like he was noticing it for the first time. The wound was superficial but deep enough to require stitches. He had not even felt it happen. Combat did that. Flooded you with so much intensity that pain became irrelevant until the violence stopped. Theron approached, his face grim. "We lost 23 men. Another 15 wounded, 3 critically. And every wagon carrying documentation is gone." Kael felt the weight of those deaths settle on his shoulders like stones. 23 soldiers who had trusted him, who had followed his orders into an ambush they all knew was coming. Men with families and futures who were now just corpses rotting in a valley because he had been arrogant enough to think he could outmaneuver the Royal Council. "This is my fault," he said quietly. "My lord," Theron started. "Do not," Kael cut him off. "Do not tell me it was unavoidable or that they died serving their duty. I made the call to ride toward the capital. I gambled their lives on the belief that evidence and public confrontation would force justice. And now they are dead because I was wrong." "You were not wrong," Serafina said. "You were sabotaged. That ambush was not random bandits. Those were professional soldiers with detailed intelligence about our route and composition. Someone inside your organization betrayed us." Kael's blood went cold. "What?" "Think about it," she pressed. "How did they know exactly when we would pass through that valley? How did they know which wagons contained evidence worth destroying?" "Someone told them." The captain's face hardened. "If there is a traitor in our ranks, my lord, I will find them and make an example that will terrify anyone else considering betrayal." "No," Kael said. "Making examples is what got us into this situation. The Royal Council rules through fear and intimidation. I will not become them just to feel powerful." "Then what do we do?" Theron asked. "We adapt," Kael said, his mind already racing through new strategies. "We lost the physical evidence, but Serafina and I still carry the most important information in our heads. Names, dates, transaction amounts. We can recreate testimony even without documents. Testimony without proof is just accusation," Serafina pointed out. "The Royal Council will dismiss anything we say as the desperate lies of a disgraced noblewoman and a power-hungry duke." "Then we need something they cannot dismiss," Kael said. We need witnesses willing to testify publicly. People the crown cannot simply execute without causing a scandal. And where exactly do we find brave witnesses willing to commit suicide by testifying against the royal council? Serafina asked. Kael smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. We do not need brave witnesses. We need terrified ones with more to lose from staying silent than speaking truth. Over the next 2 days, as the wounded convoy limped toward the capital, Kael sent coded messages to every noble house he had leverage over, not asking for loyalty or support, threatening exposure if they did not cooperate. He had spent 5 years collecting secrets, documenting scandals, building a network of information that made him dangerous to cross. Now he was calling in every debt simultaneously. Some nobles would refuse and take their chances with his retaliation, but enough would panic and cooperate to create the critical mass of testimony needed to force the king's attention. It was ugly politics, closer to extortion than justice, the kind of ruthless maneuvering that made Kael exactly what his enemies claimed he was. But survival had never been about maintaining moral purity. It was about being willing to become worse than your enemies before they destroyed you. Serafina watched him work through the political calculations with an expression that mixed admiration and horror. "You are very good at this," she observed. "At what?" "Weaponizing fear, turning people's secrets into chains. You operate like someone who has been playing this game far longer than 5 years." Kael looked up from the coded message he was writing. "I had excellent teachers. Every nobleman who tried to destroy my family after my father's execution taught me that power respects only greater power. Kindness gets you killed. Mercy makes you a target. The only protection is being so dangerous that even your enemies think twice before moving against you. And has that made you happy?" The question caught Kael off guard. No one had asked him about happiness in years. Happiness was a luxury for people whose lives were not constant warfare against political predators. "Happiness is irrelevant," he said finally. "I am alive. My enemies are not. That is the only metric that matters." Serafina moved closer, lowering her voice so the nearby soldiers could not overhear. "I used to believe that too. After my father died, I thought survival was the only goal worth pursuing, just making it through each day without breaking. But watching you these past weeks, I realized survival without purpose is just slow dying." "I have purpose," Kael said. "Destroying the royal council, exposing their corruption, making them pay for every innocent person they murdered. And after," she pressed, "after you achieve revenge, what then? Do you just go back to Ravenspire and continue ruling through fear until someone eventually puts a knife in your back?" Kael had no answer because he had never thought past the immediate crisis. Revenge and justice had consumed him so completely that he had not considered what came after. Victory had always seemed so unlikely that planning for its aftermath felt like dangerous optimism. "I do not know," he admitted. "Maybe there is no after. Maybe this is how my story ends, fighting for something that matters even if it costs me everything." Serafina reached out and took his hand, the gesture shocking in its simple intimacy. "Then at least you will not end it alone." Something shifted in Kael's carefully fortified heart, a crack in the armor he had built to survive 5 years of isolation and paranoia. He had convinced himself that attachment was weakness, that caring about anyone made you vulnerable to manipulation. But looking at Serafina, seeing her refusal to be afraid even as the world tried to crush them both, he realized isolation had its own cost. Some battles were not meant to be fought alone. They reached the capital 4 days after the ambush, their reduced convoy limping through the city gates like wounded animals barely clinging to life. The streets were crowded with merchants and commoners who stopped to stare at the infamous Beast Duke, riding through their city with blood on his armor and determination in his eyes. News of their approach had spread faster than wildfire. By the time they reached the palace district, crowds lined the streets 3 deep, some cheering, some silent, all waiting to see if the ruthless Duke from the north would challenge the crown itself or be crushed like every other nobleman who had overestimated his power. Kael kept his gaze forward, refusing to acknowledge the spectators. This was not about public opinion or political theater. This was about forcing a confrontation that the royal council could not simply make disappear. They were met at the palace gates by a full company of royal guards in ceremonial armor that did nothing to hide the real weapons they carried. The captain, a scarred veteran with dead eyes, blocked their path. "Duke Dravenmore," he said, "by order of the royal council, you are commanded to surrender yourself for questioning regarding allegations of treason and conspiracy against the crown. Kael did not dismount. I am here to request an audience with His Majesty, not to surrender to a corrupt council manipulating him like a puppet. The captain's hand moved to his sword hilt. You will surrender peacefully, or we will take you by force. You will try, Kael corrected. And then we will discover exactly how many royal guards are willing to die, protecting men who have been stealing from the kingdom's treasury for a decade. The crowd that had followed them from the gates went silent. This was the moment. The point where politics became violence and words transformed into weapons. Everyone watching understood that the next 60 seconds would define whether the kingdom fractured or the royal council crushed its most dangerous enemy. Then a voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. Stand down, Captain. Chancellor Mordrin emerged from the palace, flanked by 2 other council members. He was everything Kael had expected from years of intelligence reports. Mid-50s, distinguished gray hair, expensive robes that screamed wealth and influence. The kind of man who looked trustworthy right up until he ordered your execution. Duke Dravenmore, the Chancellor said with a smile that never reached his eyes. What a dramatic entrance. Though I must say, arriving with an armed force makes you look rather guilty of the very charges we are investigating. I brought an armed escort because the last time someone tried to deliver evidence to the crown about council corruption, they ended up dead in a prison cell, Kael replied. Lord Cassius Vale sends his regards. Or he would, if your people had not murdered him. The crowd's murmur intensified. Mordrin's expression did not change, but Kael saw the calculation behind his eyes. The Chancellor had expected this confrontation eventually. He had prepared for it, which meant Kael was already 3 moves behind in a chess game where losing meant execution. Those are serious accusations, Mordrin said. Do you have evidence to support such inflammatory claims? I had evidence, Kael said, until your assassins ambushed my convoy and destroyed it. Convenient timing. Bandits attack travelers on dangerous roads, the Chancellor replied smoothly. Surely you do not expect us to believe the crown sent soldiers to ambush a duke. That would be treason. The irony of you using that word is almost beautiful, Serafina said, speaking for the first time. Her voice carried across the courtyard with surprising strength. You murdered my father for discovering your embezzlement. Now you are trying to murder the one man with the power to expose you. Mordrin's gaze shifted to her, and for just a moment Kael saw genuine hatred flicker across his features before the diplomatic mask slammed back into place. Lady Vale, the Chancellor said, what a surprise to see you here. I was under the impression you were under house arrest at Ravenspire for your own protection. Protection from what? She asked. The truth. From the consequences of her father's treason, Mordrin corrected. A daughter should not have to pay for her father's crimes. That is why we showed mercy by placing you in Duke Dravenmore's custody rather than executing you alongside the rest of your family. The threat was barely veiled. Cooperate or we will finish what we started with your bloodline. But Serafina just smiled. Interesting that you frame it as mercy when we both know I was sent to Ravenspire as bait. You wanted to see if the beast Duke would harbor a traitor's daughter. Create evidence of conspiracy you could use to eliminate him. You have a vivid imagination, Lady Vale. I have documentation, she corrected. My father smuggled evidence to me before he died. Names, account numbers, proof of embezzlement running into amounts that could have funded entire armies. And Duke Dravenmore has been conducting his own investigation that corroborates everything. Mordrin's smile never wavered. Then I am certain you will have no problem presenting this evidence during a formal inquiry. Under oath. Where lying carries a penalty of execution. Kael felt the trap closing. Mordrin was not denying the accusations. He was daring them to make formal charges, knowing that without physical evidence, it would become a question of credibility. A disgraced noblewoman and a power-hungry duke against the word of the royal council. And the council controlled the courts, the judges, and the definition of treason. We are not here to participate in a show trial, Kael said. We demand an audience with the king. Let His Majesty hear our testimony and decide for himself if his counsel can be trusted. The king is quite ill, Mordrin said with perfectly manufactured concern. His physicians have restricted visitors to immediate family and essential council members. I am afraid an audience is impossible at this time. How convenient, Serafina said. The one man who could overrule you is suddenly too sick to grant audiences. The Chancellor's expression hardened. I will overlook that insinuation out of respect for your grief, Lady Vale. But my patience has limits. You will surrender to royal custody immediately and submit to questioning, or you will be arrested for defying a direct order from the crown. Kael looked at the soldiers surrounding them. At least 200 armed men in the courtyard alone, with reinforcements visible on the palace walls. He had 50 soldiers, half of them wounded, all exhausted from days of hard riding and brutal combat. The mathematics were brutal and undeniable. Fighting would be suicide. Surrendering meant imprisonment and likely execution. There was no winning move in this scenario, unless he changed the game entirely. Kael dismounted slowly, making sure every movement was visible and non-threatening. I will surrender on one condition. You are not in a position to negotiate conditions, Mordrin said. I disagree, Kael replied. You want me in custody because dead martyrs are harder to control than imprisoned criminals. But if I surrender peacefully in front of this crowd, you gain legitimacy. Everyone watching will see that the legal process is being followed, that I am cooperating with royal authority. The Chancellor's eyes narrowed. And your condition? Lady Vale goes free, Kael said. She is returned to Ravenspire under house arrest as originally ordered. She played no part in my investigation beyond being a source of information about her father's discoveries. Punishing her for my actions violates every principle of justice. Absolutely not, Mordrin said immediately. She is complicit in your conspiracy. Then we have a problem, Kael said quietly. Because if you arrest both of us, this crowd is going to witness the royal council destroying a duke and a grieving daughter in the same action. That looks less like justice and more like you are silencing witnesses. He let the words hang in the air, watching Mordrin calculate the political optics. The Chancellor was smart enough to understand that martyring them both in front of thousands of witnesses would create exactly the kind of public outrage he was trying to avoid. Fine, Mordrin said finally. Lady Vale will be escorted back to Ravenspire immediately. You will surrender to royal custody and submit to questioning. Kael turned to Seraphina. Go back to the keep. Continue the investigation. Find witnesses willing to testify. This is not over. You cannot do this, she said, her voice breaking slightly. If you surrender, they will kill you. Probably, Kael agreed. But if I fight, everyone dies right now, and the council wins. At least this way you survive to finish what we started. Seraphina grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. You told me we would not face this alone, and we are not, Kael said gently. You are going to survive. You are going to expose them. You're going to make them pay for every life they destroyed. That is not facing it alone. That is making sure one of us lives long enough to see justice. Tears were streaming down her face now, rage and grief and helplessness mixed into an expression that made Kael's heart crack. I do not want to be the one who survives. Neither do I, he admitted. But someone has to. And you are stronger than you know. He turned to Theron. Take Lady Vale and 10 soldiers. Escort her safely back to Ravenspire. That is a direct order. My lord, Theron started. Do it, Kael commanded. And if anything happens to her, I will haunt you from whatever afterlife accepts monsters like me. The captain saluted, tears visible in his own eyes. Kael looked at Mordrin. I am ready to surrender. On your word that Lady Vale reaches Ravenspire safely. You have my word, the Chancellor said, and they both knew it was absolutely worthless. Royal guards moved forward with chains. Kael held out his hands and let them clamp iron around his wrists without resistance. The crowd watching from beyond the courtyard gates erupted in shouts, some supporting the Duke, others celebrating his capture. As they led him toward the palace prison, Kael looked back once and saw Seraphina still standing beside her horse, watching him with an expression that would haunt him through whatever came next. He had told her she was stronger than she knew. He prayed to gods he did not believe in that he was right, because everything now depended on a broken noblewoman with nothing left to lose except the memory of a father who had died for truth. The cell they threw him in was designed for noblemen who needed to be broken psychologically before their executions. Not the crude stone dungeons used for common criminals, but elegant prison, all polished wood and iron bars, comfortable enough to make you hope you might survive while being stark enough to remind you that you absolutely would not. Kael sat on the narrow bed and assessed his situation with the cold calculation that had kept him alive through 5 years of political warfare. He was imprisoned in the heart of royal power, surrounded by enemies, stripped of weapons and allies. The royal council would stage a trial that was actually a public execution disguised as justice. He had perhaps 3 days before they killed him, unless Seraphina accomplished the impossible in that time. The door opened and Mordrin entered, flanked by guards but clearly unconcerned about personal safety. Kael was chained and unarmed. The Chancellor held all the power in this particular confrontation. "Duke Dravenmore," Mordrin said pleasantly. "I wanted to speak with you privately before the trial. Professional courtesy between men who understand how power really works." Kael said nothing. "You have been a remarkable adversary," the Chancellor continued. "For 5 years you built an empire in the north that even we could not fully penetrate. Your network of spies, your strategic brilliance, your absolute ruthlessness. Under different circumstances we might have recruited you. But instead you decided to destroy me," Kael said. "You decided to investigate matters that were none of your concern," Mordrin corrected. "Lord Vale made the same mistake. He discovered our financial arrangements and immediately assumed corruption instead of understanding the reality of governance. Running a kingdom requires resources that squeamish monarchs refuse to allocate. So we allocate them ourselves. By stealing from the treasury. By ensuring the kingdom survives incompetent leadership," Mordrin snapped, his pleasant mask slipping. "King Aldrich is a weak fool who would rather host banquets than make hard decisions. Without our intervention, this kingdom would have collapsed years ago. We are not villains, Duke Dravenmore. We are realists. You are thieves who murdered an honest man because he threatened your profit margins," Kael said flatly. "Do not dress up greed as patriotism." Mordrin smiled. "And there is the beast Duke, absolutely unbending, unwilling to compromise even when it would save his life. Do you know why you are going to die while I survive, Your Grace? Because I understand that principles are luxuries and survival requires flexibility. I would rather die with principles than live as a parasite feeding on suffering," Kael said. "Noble sentiment," the Chancellor replied. "Completely useless, but noble. Which brings me to why I am here. I am prepared to offer you a choice." Kael waited. "Confess publicly that you and Lady Vale fabricated accusations against the Council out of political ambition," Mordrin said. "Admit that you plan to use false charges of corruption to justify rebellion. Do this, and I will ensure your death is quick and merciful instead of the prolonged public torture we have planned. And Serafina will be executed alongside you as a co-conspirator," Mordrin said. "Unless she is already dead. We sent soldiers after her convoy an hour ago. By morning, the Vale bloodline will be completely erased." Kael lunged forward, chain snapping taut as rage exploded through his control. Mordrin stepped back smoothly, guards raising weapons while the Chancellor laughed. "There he is," Mordrin said. "The monster underneath all that tactical brilliance. You care about her. Actually care. How wonderfully human, how perfectly exploitable." "If you touch her," Kael snarled. "You will what?" the Chancellor interrupted. "You are chained in a cell about to be executed. You have no leverage, no allies, no options. Lady Vale is going to die because you were arrogant enough to think evidence mattered more than power." Kael forced himself back under control, breathing hard, chains still pulled tight. "You made a mistake, Chancellor." "Really?" Mordrin said. "Enlighten me. You gave Serafina Vale 3 hours head start," Kael said. "That is 3 hours for her to reach people you cannot simply murder. 3 hours to spread testimony you cannot suppress. You are so confident in your control that you did not realize she stopped being a victim the moment she stepped into Ravenspire." The Chancellor's smile faded slightly. "She is one woman with no proof and no credibility. She is a survivor who understands exactly how power works because men like you taught her," Kael corrected. "And she is angrier than you comprehend. You should have killed her immediately. Now she is going to destroy you." "We will see," Mordrin said, turning toward the door. "Enjoy your remaining time, Duke Dravenmore. The trial begins tomorrow at dawn. By sunset, you will be decorating the palace walls." After he left, Kael sat in the silence and tried not to think about Serafina riding through the night with assassins hunting her. Tried not to imagine her bleeding out on some forgotten road while he rotted in a cell, unable to help. He had told her she was stronger than she knew. Now everything depended on whether he was right, or whether he had just sent the only person he cared about in 5 years to die alone fighting his war. The cell grew colder as night descended over the capital, and Kael sat in darkness trying to calculate variables in an equation where every answer led to death. Mathematics had always been his refuge during impossible situations. Reduce human behavior to patterns, predict responses based on incentives, treat warfare as a chess problem with lethal consequences. But the numbers refused to cooperate now because too many pieces were moving in directions he could not see. Serafina was somewhere out there with assassins hunting her convoy. The trial would begin at dawn with a verdict already decided. The Royal Council controlled every mechanism of power that could save him. And he was chained in a cell designed to break men psychologically before their bodies ever reached the execution block. The only question was whether he would die having accomplished anything beyond adding his name to the long list of noblemen who had challenged corruption and lost. Then he heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Not the heavy boots of guards making rounds, but lighter steps that carried urgency rather than routine. The cell door opened and Theron entered, his face pale in the torchlight. Cale was on his feet immediately, despite the chains. "Captain, what are you doing here? If they catch you visiting me, they will arrest you for conspiracy." Theron closed the door carefully before speaking. "My lord, I have news." Lady Vale made it past the capital perimeter before the crown soldiers could intercept her convoy. Relief flooded through Kyle so intensely it felt like physical pain. "She is alive. For now," Theron said. "But the situation is worse than we thought. The Royal Council did not just send soldiers after her. They have declared her an escaped prisoner, an enemy of the crown. Every garrison between here and Ravenspire has orders to capture or kill her on sight. So she is being hunted across the entire kingdom," Kyle said. "That gives her maybe 2 days before someone gets lucky, or she runs out of places to hide. There is more, my lord." Theron's expression turned grimmer. "The council has sent messengers to every noble house you contacted about providing testimony. They are offering pardons and financial incentives to anyone who testifies against you instead. Your network of leverage is collapsing." Cale felt the trap tightening further. Mordrin was not just eliminating him. The Chancellor was systematically destroying every alliance, every backup plan, every contingency Kyle had spent years building. By the time the trial began, he would be completely isolated with no evidence, no witnesses, and no way to fight back. It was brilliant strategy, ruthless and efficient. Exactly what Kyle would have done if their positions were reversed. "How long do I have?" he asked. "The trial begins at dawn," Theron confirmed. 6 hours. Maybe less if they decide an earlier execution serves their purposes better. 6 hours to accomplish the impossible or die having failed everyone who had trusted him. Kyle looked at his captain, this loyal soldier who had followed him through 5 years of political warfare without complaint or hesitation. Theron had every reason to abandon him now, to distance himself from the doomed Duke and preserve his own survival. But instead he was here, risking execution to deliver information that changed nothing about the fundamental reality of their situation. "Why did you come?" Kyle asked quietly. "You cannot free me. You cannot stop the trial. What exactly did you think visiting me would accomplish?" Theron met his gaze steadily. "I came because you should not die alone believing everyone abandoned you, my lord. You have been many things during your rule. Brutal, sometimes cruel, but never dishonest about what you were or why you made hard choices. You deserved someone bearing witness to the end." Something cracked in Cale's armor. For 5 years he had ruled through fear and isolation, convinced that attachment was weakness and trust was suicide. He had become the Beast Duke specifically to avoid moments like this, where human connection made loss unbearable. But looking at Theron now, seeing loyalty that had nothing to do with fear or calculation, Kyle realized he had been wrong about something fundamental. Power built on fear died the moment the powerful fell. But loyalty forged through respect survived beyond any single man's destruction. "Tell me honestly, Captain," Kyle said. "If you could go back 5 years knowing everything that was coming, would you still follow me?" Theron did not hesitate. "Yes, my lord, you were not perfect, but you were real in a world of men wearing masks. That mattered, even knowing it leads here. To this cell and certain death. Especially knowing that," Theron said, "because dying for something real beats surviving while serving lies." Cale nodded slowly. "Then I need you to do something for me. Something that will probably get you killed, but might give Serafina a chance to survive." The captain straightened. "Name it. Find her before the crown does," Cale ordered. "Use whatever resources you can access. Bypass official channels. She is going to try reaching the northern territories where she has some protection. Intercept her before she walks into the garrison blockades. And when I find her, tell her the truth," Kyle said, "that I died buying her time to finish what we started. That she should not waste it trying to rescue a corpse. Her only job now is survival and revenge. in that order. "My lord," Theron started. "Do it," Kael commanded, putting every ounce of authority he still possessed into his voice. "I am giving you a direct order, Captain. Obey it." Theron saluted one final time, tears visible on his weathered face. "It has been an honor serving you, Your Grace." "The honor was mine," Kael said quietly. "Now go before the guards change shifts and someone notices you're here." After the captain left, Kael sat alone in the cell and tried not to think about Serafina riding through hostile territory with the entire kingdom hunting her. Tried not to imagine her captured, tortured, executed while he rotted in prison, unable to help. She had become something more than an ally during their time at Ravenspire. Not quite love, because love required time and peace neither of them possessed. But partnership. Recognition between two broken people who understood the cost of surviving in a world designed to crush anyone who refused to kneel. And now he was going to die without knowing if she made it to safety. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. Kyle tried to sleep, but his mind would not stop calculating impossible scenarios, searching for escape routes that did not exist. He had built his entire empire on the principle that strategic thinking could overcome any obstacle if you were ruthless enough and smart enough. But some problems had no solutions. Some games were rigged from the beginning. And sometimes the only choice was between dying on your feet or living on your knees. Dawn arrived with pale gray light filtering through the cell's narrow window. Kael heard activity increasing in the corridors, guards assembling, officials preparing for the theatrical production that would masquerade as justice. The trial would be held in the Grand Hall, where visiting dignitaries normally watch performances and diplomatic ceremonies. Today's performance would feature Duke Kael Dravenmore in the starring role of condemned traitor. They came for him as the first bells of morning rang across the capital. 6 guards in ceremonial armor, chains prepared, expressions professionally blank. No conversation, no explanation, just the mechanical efficiency of men following orders they had executed countless times before. The Grand Hall was already packed when they brought him in. Hundreds of nobles in their finest clothing, watching like vultures circling a dying animal. The royal council sat elevated on a dais designed to emphasize their authority, Mordrin at the center wearing judicial robes that made him look like truth incarnate rather than the corrupt bureaucrat he actually was. King Aldrich sat on his throne looking every bit as sick as Mordrin had claimed. The monarch was in his 60s, thin and pale, breathing laboriously like every breath required conscious effort. His eyes held the distant confusion of someone whose mind was failing faster than his body. The perfect puppet for a council that had learned to govern through him rather than for him. Kael was brought to stand in the center of the hall, chains rattling as guards positioned him within a circle of white stone that marked where the accused stood during formal trials. He looked up at the assembled council and felt nothing but cold contempt. These were the men who had murdered Cassius Vale, who had sent assassins after Serafina, who had corrupted the kingdom so thoroughly that justice was now just another commodity bought and sold by whoever held power. And today they were going to kill him for threatening their profit margins. Chancellor Mordrin stood, his voice carrying across the hall with practiced authority. "Duke Kael Dravenmore, you stand accused of high treason against the crown, conspiracy to incite rebellion, harboring a known criminal, and fabricating accusations against lawful members of the Royal Council. How do you answer these charges?" Kael met his gaze without flinching. "I answer that this entire proceeding is theater designed to silence truth. You murdered Lord Cassius Vale for discovering your embezzlement. You tried to murder his daughter. Now you are murdering me for having evidence that proves your corruption. The only criminals in this hall wear judicial robes and steal from the kingdom they pretend to serve." The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. No one spoke to the Royal Council like that. Certainly not condemned prisoners who should be begging for mercy. Mordrin's smile never wavered. "Predictable defiance," he said. "We anticipated you would attempt to disrupt these proceedings with baseless accusations, which is why we have prepared witnesses who will testify to your actual crimes." He gestured and a side door opened. 3 men entered, all wearing noble insignia from northern houses. Kyle recognized them immediately. Lords Blackwell, Torrin, and Vance, minor aristocrats he had leverage over, nobles who owed him favors or feared his retaliation, nobles who were now here to betray him. Lord Blackwell approached the witness stand first, avoiding Kael's gaze as he swore his oath. The Chancellor's voice turned gentle, encouraging. "Lord Blackwell, please tell the Council what you witnessed regarding Duke Dravenmore's activities." Blackwell's voice shook slightly, but his words were clear. Duke Dravenmore approached me 6 months ago with treasonous proposals. He suggested that the Northern Territories should separate from the Crown and establish independent governance. He claimed the king was weak and the royal council corrupt. He tried to recruit me into a conspiracy to support armed rebellion. Every word was a lie. Kael had never approached Blackwell about rebellion. The Lord owed him money from gambling debts, and Kael had used that leverage to ensure cooperation on trade agreements. Nothing more. But lies delivered under oath before the royal council became official truth. Lord Torrin testified next, spinning an equally fabricated story about Kael recruiting soldiers for a private army meant to march on the capital. Lord Vance claimed Kael had explicitly stated his intention to seize the throne and execute the royal council. All lies. All delivered with the practiced smoothness of witnesses who had been coached exactly what to say. Kael watched the performance with detached fascination. This was power in its purest form. Not military strength or popular support. Just the ability to manufacture reality through institutional authority. The royal council could turn truth into lies, and lies into truth simply by controlling who testified and what consequences followed dissent. It was brilliant, ruthless. Exactly how he would have destroyed an enemy if their positions were reversed. When the third witness finished, Mordrin turned back to Kael. Do you have any witnesses who can refute these testimonies, Your Grace? Any evidence that contradicts these accounts of your treasonous activities? My evidence was destroyed by your assassins when they ambushed my convoy, Kael said. My witnesses are either dead or too terrified to testify against you. But we both know this trial is not about truth. It is about eliminating someone who threatened your control. The Chancellor's expression turned sympathetic in a way that made Kael's skin crawl. I understand you are frightened, Duke Dravenmore. Facing execution must be terrifying. But fabricating conspiracy theories about the royal council does not change the facts. Multiple witnesses have testified under oath about your treason. The evidence is overwhelming. He paused, letting the words settle across the hall. However, the Crown is merciful. If you confess your crimes and renounce these baseless accusations against the council, I am authorized to recommend a reduced sentence. Permanent exile instead of execution. You would lose your title and lands, but you would keep your life. Kael felt the trap closing from a new angle. Mordrin was offering him survival if he publicly validated the council's narrative. If he confessed to treason, he never committed and abandoned the evidence against their corruption. It was a good offer, smart politics. Give the condemned man a choice between dying with principles or living as a broken shell of his former self. Most men would take survival, but Kael had spent 5 years becoming something other than most men. No, he said simply. The hall went silent. Mordrin's eyebrows rose. No. I will not confess to crimes I did not commit, Kael said. I will not validate this farce by pretending it is justice. You want me to choose survival over truth. I choose truth over survival. That is a death sentence, the Chancellor said. Then at least I die honest, Kael replied. Which is more than you can say. For just a moment, genuine rage flashed across Mordrin's face before the diplomatic mask returned. So be it. Duke Kael Dravenmore, this council finds you guilty of high treason and conspiracy against the crown. The sentence is death by execution, to be carried out at sunset today in the public square, so all may witness what becomes of traitors. The crowd erupted, some shouting approval, others protesting, most just watching in fascinated horror as the Beast Duke stood unmoved by his own death sentence. Guards moved forward to escort Kael back to his cell for the remaining hours before execution. He went without resistance, mind already detaching from the proceedings, preparing for what came next. But as they led him through the side corridors away from the grand hall, something unexpected happened. A guard he did not recognize moved close and whispered 3 words. Lady Vale lives. Kael's head snapped around, but the guard was already gone, melted back into the formation like he had never spoken. It could be a trick, a final cruelty designed to give him false hope before death. But the guard had used Seraphina's proper title, Lady Vale, not prisoner or escaped criminal, which meant someone loyal to him still operated inside the palace. And if Seraphina lived, then everything he had sacrificed might actually matter. The hours between sentencing and execution passed in strange suspended time. Kael was returned to his cell where he sat alone listening to the sounds of construction outside as workers erected the execution platform. They were building the stage where he would die for an audience of thousands. Political theater designed to demonstrate what happened to noblemen who challenged royal authority. He tried not to think about Serafina, tried not to hope she had made it to safety, or imagine she might somehow accomplish the impossible and expose the royal council's corruption before they killed him. Hope was dangerous. It made dying harder, but he could not quite extinguish it. Sunset approached with golden light streaming through the cell window. Kael heard the crowds gathering in the public square, thousands of citizens coming to witness either justice or murder, depending on their perspective. The noise built to a dull roar, anticipation and bloodlust mixing into the kind of atmosphere that made civilized people act like animals. The cell door opened, but instead of guards coming to escort him to execution, Chancellor Mordrin entered alone. Kael stood slowly. "Come to gloat, Chancellor? Enjoy watching me die up close before the public show." Mordrin closed the door carefully. "Actually, Your Grace, I came to make you one final offer. A legitimate one this time. I already refused your first offer." "That was before you knew what I know," the Chancellor said. "Before you understood that Lady Vale did not escape successfully. She was captured this morning trying to cross the northern border." Ice flooded Kael's veins. "You are lying." "I wish I were," Mordrin said, and his tone actually sounded genuine, "because her capture creates complications I did not want. She is being transported back to the capital as we speak. She will arrive tomorrow morning and be executed immediately for escaping royal custody and continued treason." "Why are you telling me this?" Kael asked. "Because I am prepared to spare her life," Mordrin said. "In exchange for your full cooperation." Kael's mind raced. This was the real trap. The final move Mordrin had been holding in reserve. Kill Kael publicly to demonstrate royal authority, but keep Serafina alive as insurance against whatever evidence might still surface, or use her as leverage against a man who clearly cared more about her survival than his own. "What cooperation?" Kael asked carefully. "You will confess publicly before your execution," the Chancellor said. "Admit your treason, validate the Council's actions, denounce Lady Vale as a manipulator who seduced you into conspiracy against the crown. You will die having thoroughly destroyed any credibility she might use to continue investigating us. And in exchange—" "She lives," Mordrin said. "Imprisoned, certainly, monitored constantly, but alive. You have my word." "Your word is worthless," Kael said. "Perhaps," the Chancellor agreed. "But it is the only thing standing between Lady Vale's survival and her execution. You have 5 minutes to decide, Your Grace. Die as a defiant traitor and watch her hang tomorrow, or die having saved the one person you actually care about." He turned and walked to the door, pausing at the threshold. "For what it is worth, Duke Dravenmore, I actually respect you. In another life, we might have been allies. But you made the fatal mistake of believing truth mattered more than power. History is written by survivors, not martyrs." Then the Chancellor was gone, leaving Kael alone with the most impossible choice he had ever faced. Die with principles intact but knowing Serafina would be executed for continuing the fight he had started, or die having betrayed everything they had worked for but possibly saving her life. No strategic thinking could resolve this dilemma. No tactical brilliance would reveal a third option. This was not about outmaneuvering enemies or finding escape routes. This was about deciding what mattered more: truth or love, justice or survival, the mission or the person. Kael sat in his cell as the sunset turned the stone walls golden and tried to become someone capable of making that choice without his soul dying before his body reached the execution block. Outside, the crowds were chanting his name, some calling for justice, others demanding blood, all waiting to witness the fall of the Beast Duke who had ruled the North through fear and absolute conviction. None of them knew the monster was already broken. The guards came for him as darkness fell. They led him through corridors lined with torches, past nobles who watched with expressions ranging from satisfaction to fear, toward the public square where thousands had gathered to watch him die. The execution platform rose 12 feet above the crowd, torches creating a circle of light that made everything beyond feel like darkness pressing in. Kael climbed the steps with his chains rattling, each movement feeling distant and unreal, like he was watching someone else walk toward their death. Chancellor Mordrin stood on the platform beside the executioner, a hooded figure holding an axe that looked both ceremonial and lethally sharp. The Chancellor's expression was professionally sympathetic, the face of a man doing difficult but necessary work. Duke Cale Dravenmore, Mordrin announced to the crowd, you have been found guilty of high treason against the crown. Before sentence is carried out, you are permitted final words. Do you wish to address the assembled witnesses? This was the moment, the choice that would define everything. Kael looked out at the crowd and saw faces twisted with hatred, curiosity, fear, people who had come to watch a monster die and validate their belief that justice existed in the kingdom. They wanted him to confess, wanted him to break, wanted proof that power and righteousness aligned. He opened his mouth and made his choice. I confess, he said, his voice carrying across the square. I conspired against the royal council. I recruited allies for rebellion. I manipulated Lady Seraphina Vale into supporting my treasonous ambitions. Everything I am accused of is true. The crowd erupted in vindicated roars. Mordrin's smile was genuine now, and Kael felt his soul die even as his body remained standing. He had chosen survival over truth, Seraphina's life over justice. He had become exactly what the royal council needed him to be, a broken traitor who validated their authority with his confession. The executioner moved forward, positioning Kael beside the execution block. The crowd's noise built to a crescendo. Torches flickered, the axe rose, then everything shattered. Explosion ripped through the eastern wall of the square. Stone and fire erupted skyward. The crowd screamed and scattered. Guards shouted commands that were lost in chaos. And through the smoke and destruction rode 50 soldiers wearing Raven Spire colors, led by a woman whose face was set with fury and determination. Seraphina Vale had not been captured. She had been gathering an army. The execution platform became a battlefield in seconds. Ravenspire soldiers crashed into royal guards. Steel rang against steel. Blood sprayed across stone. Kael stood frozen in shock as everything he thought he knew disintegrated around him. Seraphina cut through guards like they were paper, her sword moving with lethal efficiency until she reached the platform. Their eyes met across the chaos, and Kael saw something in her expression that made his false confession feel like acid in his throat. She had heard everything. She knew he had betrayed their mission to save her, and the look on her face was not gratitude. It was rage. You confessed, she screamed over the battle. You gave them everything. To save you, Kael shouted back. I did not need saving, she snarled, cutting through his chains with a blade still wet with blood. I needed you to hold the line, to die defiant if necessary, and instead you broke. Mordrin told me you were captured, that they would execute you tomorrow. And you believed him, Seraphina said, her voice breaking with fury and grief. You believed the man who murdered my father, who has lied about everything from the beginning. You threw away our entire mission because you thought I needed protection. I was trying to keep you alive. I was trying to burn down the kingdom if that is what it took to expose them, she screamed. And you just handed them the confession that makes me a liar and a seductress instead of a witness to their corruption. Around them, the battle was turning. Royal reinforcements were arriving. Ravenspire soldiers were being overwhelmed. The rescue was collapsing. We have to go, Seraphina said, grabbing his arm. Now. They ran through smoke and chaos, bodies falling around them, the execution platform burning behind them. Ravenspire soldiers formed a protective corridor that closed behind them as they fought their way out of the square and into the narrow streets beyond. They did not stop running until they reached the city outskirts where horses waited with the surviving soldiers. Maybe 30 men left from the 50 who had attacked the square. 20 had died rescuing a duke who had already destroyed the mission they were all willing to die for. Kael mounted a horse in numb silence. Seraphina swung into her saddle and gave the order to ride without looking at him. They galloped into darkness with royal soldiers in pursuit, and everything they had fought for shattered into pieces impossible to reassemble. The convoy did not stop until dawn when exhaustion and wounded horses forced them to take shelter in an abandoned mill deep in the forest. Ravenspire soldiers collapsed, tending injuries and checking supplies while Seraphina stood apart, staring at nothing. Kael approached carefully. Seraphina, Do not, she cut him off without turning. Do not apologize. Do not explain. I heard your confession. Thousands of people heard it. By tomorrow it will be repeated across the entire kingdom. The Beast Duke admitting to treason and claiming he manipulated me into supporting his conspiracy. It was the only way Mordrin would spare your life. She turned finally and he saw tears streaming down her face. I did not ask you to save me. I asked you to fight, to hold the line no matter what, and you broke. He was going to execute you. Good, she screamed. Let him. Let them all watch while they murder an innocent woman. Let the kingdom see exactly what their royal council does to truth. That is how you create revolution, Your Grace. Not by living, by dying in a way that makes your death matter. Kale felt his own rage building. I am sorry I chose your life over your martyrdom. Next time, I will be sure to let you die for political theater. This was never about theater, Serafina said, her voice dropping to something cold and broken. This was about exposing men who destroy lives and profit from suffering. And you just gave them the perfect weapon to dismiss every piece of evidence we collected. You confessed, under oath, in front of thousands. Nothing I say now will matter because the Beast Duke already admitted I was his manipulated pawn. She was right. Kyle knew she was right. His confession had been strategic in the moment, but catastrophic to their long-term mission. He had chosen her survival over justice, and in doing so had destroyed both. I thought I was saving you, he said quietly. You thought you were saving yourself from having to watch someone else you care about die, Serafina corrected. This was not about me. This was about you refusing to survive another execution. My father, your father, me. You keep losing people to power and you thought you could finally win by choosing survival over principles. And what would you have done? Kael demanded. If you were chained on that platform and Mordrin offered to spare my life in exchange for confession, would you have stayed defiant? Yes, she said without hesitation. Because some things matter more than individual survival. Because justice delayed is justice denied. Because if we will not die for truth, then we are just another set of liars fighting over who gets to control the narrative. They stood in silence. Two people who had fought side by side, now separated by a chasm created in a single moment of impossible choice. Finally, Kael spoke. So what now? Now, Serafina said, her voice empty of everything except exhaustion. We become what we never wanted to be. Fugitives running from a kingdom that thinks we are traitors. Your confession made sure of that. We can rebuild. Kael tried, find new witnesses, new evidence. With what credibility? She asked. You are a confessed traitor. I am your manipulated accomplice. The Royal Council controls every institution that could validate our claims. We lost, Your Grace. The moment you chose my life over the mission, we lost everything. Then I made the wrong choice, Kael said. Serafina looked at him with an expression that held more sorrow than anger. No. You made the human choice. You chose love over principle. Any decent person would have done the same. The problem is that decency gets you killed in a world run by monsters. And I needed you to be monstrous enough to win. She turned and walked away, leaving Kael standing alone beside the mill while dawn broke over a kingdom that now believed every lie the Royal Council had manufactured. He had become the Beast Duke by choosing survival over mercy. Now he had lost everything by choosing mercy over survival. And somewhere in the capital, Chancellor Mordrin was already composing the official history that would bury truth so deep that no one would ever find it again. The abandoned mill became a tomb of silence, broken only by the sound of wounded soldiers trying not to scream while field medics worked with inadequate supplies and desperate hands. Kael stood apart from the group watching Serafina organize the survivors with cold efficiency. Her orders clipped and precise, every movement designed to create distance between them. She had not spoken to him directly since their confrontation at dawn, had not even looked at him except when absolutely necessary for tactical coordination. He had saved her life and lost her trust in the same moment, and the mathematics of that exchange felt like a wound deeper than any blade could inflict. The reality of their situation settled over the camp like ash. 30 soldiers, no supplies beyond what they carried. Every garrison between here and the Northern Territories now hunting them as confirmed traitors. The Royal Council had won so completely that even attempting to fight back seemed less like strategy and more like elaborate suicide. Theron approached carefully, his armor still bearing blood from the execution square battle. My lord, we need to discuss our options. We have no options, Kael said flatly. We are fugitives with a price on our heads and a confessed traitor leading them. The moment I opened my mouth on that platform, I destroyed any chance of political resistance. Then we run, the captain suggested. Get to Ravenspire, fortify the keep, wait for the council to overextend trying to dig us out. And accomplish what exactly? Kael asked. Hide in my fortress while the kingdom believes every lie Mordrin manufactured. Watch while he consolidates power and eliminates anyone who might have testified against the council. We did not sacrifice everything just to survive as examples of failed rebellion. What would you have us do? Kael looked at the exhausted soldiers, at Serafina standing apart like a general who had lost faith in her commanding officer, at the forest surrounding them that represented the shrinking territory where they could still move freely. Every strategic calculation pointed toward the same conclusion. They had one move left. One impossible gambit that would either destroy the Royal Council or get everyone killed trying. "We go back," he said. Theron stared at him. "Back where?" "To the capital," Kael said. "To the palace. We find evidence the council cannot suppress or burn. We force a confrontation they cannot control. And we make them execute us in a way that creates more problems than our testimony would have." "That is suicide," the captain said. "No," Kael corrected. "Suicide would be running until they eventually hunt us down and kill us in some forgotten forest where no one witnesses our deaths. This is weaponizing our execution, making our deaths matter more than our lives currently do." Serafina was suddenly beside them, her approach so silent that both men startled. "You want to martyr yourself?" she said. "Throw away 30 soldiers on a revenge fantasy that accomplishes nothing except making you feel heroic." Kael met her gaze. "I want to finish what we started. You were right earlier. Some things matter more than individual survival. Justice, truth, making sure the people who destroyed your father do not get to write history without consequences. Do not quote my words back at me," she snapped. "You lost the right to talk about principles when you confessed to crimes you did not commit. Then what would you have me do?" Kael demanded. "Run. Hide. Spend the rest of however long we survive knowing we had evidence to destroy corrupt men and chose safety over action. Is that the legacy you want for your father? That his daughter had the truth and kept silent to preserve her own life?" The words hit like physical blows. Serafina's expression cracked, rage and grief warring across her features. "You do not get to use my father against me. You do not get to pretend sudden moral clarity after you already broke." "I broke trying to save you," Kael said. "I made the wrong choice, but I made it for the right reasons. And now I am trying to fix what I destroyed. You can hate me for the rest of your life if we survive this. But let me at least die having done something that matters." Serafina looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for something she clearly could not find. Finally she spoke, her voice empty of everything except exhausted resignation. "Fine. We go back. We attack the palace. We die trying to expose men who will suppress whatever evidence we find and execute us as traitors. At least it will be over quickly." She turned and walked away before Kael could respond. Theron watched her go. "My lord, she is right. This plan has almost no chance of success." "I know," Kael said, "but almost no chance is better than no chance at all. And I would rather die fighting than live knowing I chose cowardice when courage was required." The captain nodded slowly. "Then I am with you. We all are. You have our loyalty to the end, whatever that end looks like." Kael felt something tighten in his chest. These soldiers had followed him through 5 years of political warfare, had trusted his judgment through impossible situations, and now they were volunteering to die for a mission that would likely accomplish nothing beyond adding their names to the list of casualties. Leadership had always been about making hard choices that other people paid for with their lives. But this felt different. This was not strategic calculation. This was asking men to die for redemption he probably did not deserve. "Thank you, Captain," he said quietly. "Make sure everyone understands what we are attempting. No one goes into this believing we are likely to survive." The plan came together over the next 6 hours with the desperate creativity of people who had nothing left to lose. They would infiltrate the capital at night using sewer systems and forgotten maintenance tunnels, split into 3 teams targeting different objectives. One team would assault the royal treasury where financial records were kept. Another would hit the council chambers where sealed documents and official correspondence were stored. The third would create chaos in the palace barracks to draw guards away from the primary targets. It was a terrible plan. Too many variables. Too much dependence on outdated intelligence about palace security. Too much faith that they could fight through professional soldiers and escape with evidence before being overwhelmed. But it was the only plan they had. As darkness fell and the soldiers prepared weapons and armor scavenged from dead royal guards, Kyle found Serafina checking her sword with mechanical focus. She had changed into combat gear that made her look less like a noblewoman and more like a soldier preparing for war. The transformation was both impressive and heartbreaking. He approached carefully. "Serafina, we need to talk." No, we do not, she said without looking up. We need to survive the next 12 hours. Everything else can wait until we are either dead or successful. If we die tonight, I need you to know something. Do not, she cut him off. Do not make this into a deathbed confession. Do not try to apologize again for choices you cannot unmake. Just fight. Just help me finish what my father started. That is all I need from you. Cale wanted to argue, wanted to explain that his confession had been an impossible choice made under unbearable pressure, that he had genuinely believed she was captured and would die unless he cooperated. That choosing her life over the mission was not weakness, but the first honest thing he had done in 5 years. But looking at her now, seeing the walls she had built against him, he realized words would not bridge the gap his betrayal had created. Only action mattered now. Understood, he said. I will see you on the other side of this. If there is another side, she replied. They moved toward the capital under cover of darkness. 30 soldiers traveling in silence through forests that gradually gave way to farmland and then urban sprawl. The city loomed ahead like a beast waiting to devour them, its walls and towers black against the night sky, torches marking guard positions and patrol routes. Kael had spent years studying the capital's defenses, memorizing weak points and access routes that might be exploited during emergencies. Now he led his people through those weaknesses, like a ghost returning to haunt the place of his destruction. They entered through an old sewer grate that maintenance workers had forgotten to lock, descending into darkness that smelled of waste and decay. The tunnels beneath the capital formed a maze that predated the current palace by centuries, built and rebuilt by different regimes until no single map showed the complete network. Kael navigated by memory and instinct, taking turns that felt right, even when logic suggested otherwise. Behind him, soldiers moved in tight formation, weapons ready, breathing controlled despite the suffocating atmosphere. They emerged in 3 different locations. Kael's team came up through a forgotten cellar that connected to the Royal Treasury building. Seraphina's group surfaced near the council chambers. Theron's soldiers broke into the palace barracks from below, timing their assault to coincide with guard shift changes. The plan was to hit all 3 targets simultaneously at midnight, when skeleton crews manned most positions. Kael crouched in the cellar darkness, counting seconds until the signal. Around him, 8 soldiers waited with the tense stillness of men preparing to die. He had chosen veterans for this team, fighters who understood that retrieving financial evidence from the Royal Treasury meant breaking into the most heavily guarded building in the capital. The first explosion came from the direction of the barracks. Theron's signal. Immediate chaos erupted above them as alarms rang and soldiers scrambled to respond to the attack. Now, Kael ordered. They burst from the cellar into the Treasury building's lower levels, moving fast through corridors that were supposed to be empty, but immediately proved otherwise. Guards materialized from side rooms, shouting challenges that died in their throats as Ravenspire soldiers cut them down with brutal efficiency. Kael led the charge up marble staircases toward the archive levels where sealed financial records were stored. Every step felt like fighting through water. Resistance building as more guards converged on their position. Steel rang against steel. Blood sprayed across expensive tapestries. Men screamed and died in hallways designed for quiet bureaucratic work. They reached the archive chamber through sheer momentum and violence. Kael killed the guard captain blocking the entrance, his blade punching through ceremonial armor that was never meant to stop a duke who had spent years training for exactly this kind of close-quarters brutality. The door crashed open and they poured inside. The archive was exactly what Kael expected. Floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with ledgers, correspondence, sealed documents marked with official stamps. A bureaucratic treasure trove containing decades of financial transactions, including the embezzlement evidence they needed, and absolutely no way to carry more than a fraction of it out before reinforcements arrived. Take anything marked with Royal Council seals, Kael commanded. Priority to ledgers dated within the last 10 years. Move fast. His soldiers spread through the archive, grabbing documents, while Kael stood guard at the entrance, listening to the battle intensifying throughout the building. Theron's team was still engaged in the barracks, creating chaos, but Seraphina's group had gone radio silent. No explosions from the council chambers, no sounds of combat from that direction, which meant either they had succeeded so perfectly that no one noticed, or they had been captured before firing a single shot. "My lord!" one of his soldiers called out. "You need to see this!" Kael turned to find the man holding a ledger marked with Chancellor Mordrin's personal seal. Inside were transaction records showing payments to assassins, bribes to judges, funds redirected from military budgets into personal accounts. Everything they needed to prove the council's corruption, and it was all signed in Mordrin's own hand. "Take it," Kael ordered. "That ledger is worth more than all of us combined." Footsteps thundered in the corridor outside. Heavy boots. Multiple squads converging on their position. The window for escape was closing fast. "Fall back," Kael commanded, fighting retreat to the sewer entrance. They moved as a unit, soldiers covering each other while backing toward the stairs. Royal guards flooded the hallway, a river of steel and fury that crashed against Ravenspire, discipline like waves against cliffs. Kael fought at the front, his blade moving with mechanical precision, each strike calculated to disable rather than kill because corpses blocked hallways and slowed pursuit. They were halfway to the cellar when the explosion ripped through the eastern wing of the building. The blast was massive, far larger than anything Theron's team should have been capable of producing. The entire treasury building shook, stone cracked, support beams groaned. For a terrifying moment, Kael thought the whole structure might collapse. Then he realized what had happened. Someone had blown the council chambers. Serafina's team had not been captured. They had been planning enough explosives to turn the political heart of the kingdom into rubble. The royal guards pursuing them hesitated, confused by the secondary explosion. Kael used that moment of uncertainty to push forward, his soldiers cutting through the disorganized line and sprinting for the cellar entrance. They made it down with royal soldiers flooding in behind them. The sewer tunnels became a nightmare of close combat and near darkness, blades flashing in torchlight, men falling and drowning in water that ran red with blood. Kael lost 3 soldiers in those tunnels, good men who died buying seconds for the rest to escape. They emerged in the warehouse district gasping and bleeding, still clutching the ledger like it was worth the lives spent acquiring it. Behind them, the capital was erupting into chaos. Fires burned in the palace district, alarms rang across the city, soldiers mobilized in every direction. Kael counted his remaining team. 5 soldiers left from 8. Acceptable losses for retrieving evidence that could destroy the royal council. If Serafina had survived to help use it, they reached the rendezvous point in an abandoned chapel on the city outskirts. Theron was already there with half his team missing and wounds that needed immediate attention. The captain's armor was dented and scorched, his face covered in soot and blood. "My lord," Theron gasped. "We hit the barracks hard, but they had more soldiers than intelligence suggested. Lost 15 men getting clear." Kael felt each death like a stone added to the weight on his shoulders. 15 soldiers, 3 from his own team, 18 dead total, and Serafina's team was still missing. They waited in the chapel while fires burned across the capital and search parties swept the streets hunting for the attackers. Minutes crawled past with agonizing slowness. Every sound outside made soldiers reach for weapons. Every shadow looked like enemies closing in. Then the chapel door crashed open and Serafina stumbled inside, supported by 2 soldiers. She was covered in blood and soot, her left arm hanging at an unnatural angle, her face pale with shock and blood loss. But she was alive, and she was smiling. "We did it," she said, her voice shaking with exhaustion and pain. "We destroyed the council chambers, every sealed document, every piece of correspondence they kept hidden. All of it burned or buried under rubble." Kael moved to support her as the soldiers helped her toward a bench. "How many did you lose?" "All of them," she said. "I am the only one who made it out. The others died holding the line so I could trigger the explosives." Her smile faded as the reality of those deaths settled across her features. Kael felt rage and grief warring in his chest. 18 dead, maybe more. All to retrieve 1 ledger and destroy evidence that the council could simply claim never existed. It was a catastrophic exchange rate. But looking at the ledger in his hands, seeing Mordrin's signature on documents proving embezzlement and murder, Kael realized they had accomplished something the Chancellor never expected. They had evidence that could not be dismissed as fabrication because it was written in the council's own hand. "We need to move," Theron said. "The search is expanding. They will find this location within the hour." "Where do we go?" one of the soldiers asked. "Every garrison in the kingdom is hunting us." Kael looked at the exhausted survivors, at Serafina cradling her broken arm, at the ledger that had cost so many lives to acquire. Strategic thinking said they should run, get to Ravenspire, fortify and hope the evidence could be used eventually when political conditions changed. But Kael had spent 5 years being strategic, calculating survival above all else. and it had gotten him exactly nowhere except a cell and a confession that destroyed his credibility. Sometimes survival was not the victory. Sometimes you had to burn the world to save it. "We go to the king," he said. Everyone stared at him. "My lord," Theron said carefully, "the king is surrounded by the very people we are trying to expose. Walking into the palace is suicide." "I know," Kael agreed, "but Mordrin made one critical mistake. He kept the king alive because killing a monarch creates succession crises. As long as King Aldrich lives, he is still technically the highest authority in the kingdom. If we can reach him, if we can present this evidence directly, he has the power to override the royal council." "The king is practically a prisoner himself," Serafina pointed out. "Sick and manipulated. He believed their lies about my father. He will believe their lies about us. Unless we force him to see truth he cannot ignore," Kael said. "This ledger proves the council has been stealing from the kingdom for over a decade. Proves they murdered Lord Vale to hide their corruption. The king is weak, but he is not stupid. Show him undeniable evidence and he has to act or admit he is complicit." "And if he refuses?" Serafina asked. "Then we die having tried everything," Kael said. "But at least we die forcing the council to execute us in front of the highest authority in the land. That creates political complications they cannot easily suppress. It was insane, suicidal. Exactly the kind of reckless gambit that got brave people killed and accomplished nothing except adding names to casualty lists." But looking around the chapel at soldiers who had already sacrificed everything, at Serafina who had lost her entire team destroying the council chambers, Kael realized they were all already dead. The only question was whether they died as fugitives hunted through sewers or as witnesses who forced the kingdom to confront uncomfortable truths. "I am going," he said. "Anyone who wants to leave can do so without judgment. You have all earned the right to choose survival over this final mission." No one moved. Theron stood. "Where you go, we go, to the end." The remaining soldiers murmured agreement. Serafina rose despite her injuries. "You're still an idiot who confessed to crimes he did not commit. But you are right about one thing. My father died trying to reach the king with evidence. I will not dishonor his memory by choosing safety over finishing what he started." She moved close enough that only Kael could hear her next words. "But this does not mean I forgive you. It means I am willing to die beside you instead of hating you from a distance. There is a difference." Kael nodded. "Understood." They gathered what weapons and supplies remained and moved toward the palace through a city that was hunting them with systematic intensity. Every street had patrols. Every intersection showed guards checking travelers. The search net was tightening with professional efficiency. But Kael had spent years learning the capital's hidden routes and forgotten passages. He led his people through maintenance tunnels and abandoned buildings, across rooftops and through cellars, always moving toward the palace at the city's heart. Dawn was breaking when they reached the final barrier. The palace walls rose 50 feet high, guards stationed every 30 yards. The main gates sealed and reinforced. Getting inside would require either an army or a miracle. Kael had neither, but he did have one advantage the royal council had not anticipated. He knew the secret passage Lord Cassius Vale had discovered years ago while working in the royal treasury. A forgotten maintenance tunnel that connected the old palace foundations to the current structure, built centuries ago and lost to institutional memory. Vale had documented it in his evidence, hoping to use it to smuggle witnesses out if the council moved against him. Now his daughter would use it to smuggle witnesses in. The entrance was hidden beneath an old fountain in the palace gardens. They approached in the pre-dawn darkness, soldiers creating diversions while Kael and Serafina worked the mechanism that opened the passage. Stone ground against stone. A section of foundation slid aside, revealing stairs descending into absolute darkness. "We go alone," Kael said to Theron. "You and the others create enough chaos that the council thinks we are attacking from multiple directions. Make them spread their forces thin." The captain nodded. "Good luck, my lord." They descended into darkness that smelled of centuries and abandonment. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for two people walking single file. Water dripped from stone. Rats scattered from their approach. Behind them, the entrance sealed itself, cutting off escape. "This is it," Serafina said. "No way out except forward." "Has been that way for a while now," Kael replied. They walked in silence through tunnels that gradually sloped upward. Kael counted his steps, matching them against the map Vale had drawn in his documentation. They should emerge somewhere near the royal apartments where the king was kept isolated from anyone who might challenge the council's narrative. The passage ended at a stone wall with no obvious mechanism for opening. Kael searched by touch, fingers probing mortar and stone, looking for the trigger Vale had described. "Found it," he said, pressing a specific stone that clicked inward. The wall swung open on oiled hinges, revealing a dark chamber beyond. They stepped through into what appeared to be a storage room filled with old furniture and forgotten decorations. Dusty and abandoned, but unmistakably inside the palace proper. Kael moved to the door and listened. Footsteps in the corridor beyond. Guards making rounds. Voices discussing the night's chaos. The entire palace was on high alert, searching for the attackers who had destroyed the treasury building and council chambers. And those attackers had just walked past every defensive line straight into the heart of royal authority. "We need to reach the king's chambers," Kael whispered. "Third floor, east wing. If we move fast, we can get there before guards realize we are inside the palace." Serafina nodded, her broken arm held tight against her body, but her good hand gripping a blade with lethal readiness. They slipped into this corridor and moved like ghosts, through hallways that should have been impossible to navigate undetected. Every corner was a gamble, every staircase a potential death trap. But they had momentum and desperation and the kind of reckless courage that came from having nothing left to lose. They were halfway to the royal apartments when the alarms went off. Someone had discovered their infiltration. The entire palace erupted into organized chaos as guards mobilized to seal every exit and sweep every corridor. Kael and Serafina ran, abandoning stealth for speed, racing toward the king's chambers with soldiers flooding in behind them. They burst through the royal apartment doors to find King Aldrich sitting in bed, looking like a confused old man woken from restless sleep. His personal guards moved to intercept but hesitated when they saw who had invaded their king's chambers. "Duke Dravenmore," the king said, his voice weak but carrying genuine confusion. "They said you were executed yesterday. How are you here?" Kael approached carefully, hands visible and empty except for the ledger. "Your Majesty, I was not executed because Lady Serafina Vale rescued me. We have evidence that proves your royal council has been betraying you for over a decade. Evidence they murdered to hide." He held up the ledger. "This contains financial records signed by Chancellor Mordrin himself showing embezzlement, bribery, payments to assassins. Everything you need to understand that the men you trust have been destroying your kingdom from within." The king stared at the ledger like it might bite him. "That is a serious accusation. Duke Dravenmore." "It is documented truth, Your Majesty," Serafina said, moving forward despite her injuries. "My father died trying to bring you this information. Please, at least look at it before they kill us." King Aldrich reached for the ledger with trembling hands. The door crashed open and Chancellor Mordrin entered, surrounded by 20 royal guards. His expression was calm, but his eyes held murderous fury barely contained beneath diplomatic polish. "Your Majesty," the Chancellor said smoothly, "step away from these criminals. They have already proven their capacity for violence and deception." Kael kept his gaze on the king. "Read it, Your Majesty. Look at the signatures. The evidence speaks for itself." King Aldrich opened the ledger and began reading. The silence stretched while the most powerful man in the kingdom examined proof that the people closest to him were traitors wearing masks of loyalty. Finally, the king looked up, and the expression on his face was not confusion or shock. It was resignation. "I know," he said quietly. The words hit Kael like physical blows. "You know," he repeated. "I have known for years," the king admitted. "The council came to me a decade ago with their proposal. The kingdom was failing. Corrupt governors, incompetent military leadership, economic collapse. They said they could fix it if I gave them flexibility to operate outside normal constraints. So you authorized their crimes," Serafina said, her voice hollow with disbelief. "I authorized survival," the king corrected. "They stabilized the economy, eliminated threats, built the infrastructure we needed. Yes, they enriched themselves in the process, but the kingdom survived. That was all that mattered. You let them murder my father," Serafina whispered. "Your father was going to destroy the entire system over moral principles that would have gotten thousands killed," the king said. "The council did what was necessary to protect stability. I am sorry for your loss, Lady Vale, but one man's life measured against kingdom-wide chaos is an acceptable exchange." Kael felt reality fracturing around him. They had not been fighting corrupt officials operating behind a deceived king. They had been fighting a system where the king himself had authorized the corruption because survival mattered more than justice. There was no good authority to appeal to, no higher power that would validate their evidence and punish wrongdoing. The entire kingdom was complicit in its own destruction. Chancellor Mordrin smiled. You see, Duke Dravenmore, there is no winning this game. The king understands what you apparently cannot. That power requires dirty hands, and pure power requires very dirty hands indeed. Guards moved forward to arrest them, and Kael realized they had lost before the fight even began. Not because they lacked evidence or courage or determination, but because they were trying to save a kingdom that had already chosen to die. The royal chamber became a tomb where truth died, surrounded by men who had chosen comfort over conscience. Kael stood frozen as guards moved to arrest him, his mind trying to process the fundamental collapse of everything he had believed about power and justice. The king was not a puppet being manipulated by corrupt advisors. He was an active participant who had authorized every crime, every murder, every betrayal because maintaining stability mattered more than maintaining principles. There was no appeal to higher authority because the highest authority had already sold his soul. Serafina made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a scream, her good hand dropping the blade she had been holding. "My father died for nothing," she said, her voice hollow. He discovered corruption and reported it to the one man who already knew, who had given permission, who sacrificed him to protect the system. "Your father was an idealist," King Aldrich said, and there was genuine sadness in his tone. He believed truth mattered more than consequences. "But I have ruled for 40 years, Lady Vale. I have watched kingdoms tear themselves apart over principle. Better corruption that maintains order than purity that creates chaos." "Better," Kael repeated, the word tasting like poison. "You call murdering innocent men to hide embezzlement better. You think authorizing assassination is acceptable governance. I think survival requires choices that keep you awake at night," the king said. "You ruled the North for 5 years, Duke Dravenmore. You tell me you never made decisions that haunted you, never chose the lesser evil because the greater good demanded it. And there it was, the terrible logic that corrupted every ideology and destroyed every revolution. The belief that ends justified means, that survival excused atrocity, that maintaining power was its own moral imperative regardless of how that power was wielded. Kael had lived by that philosophy for 5 years, had become the Beast Duke specifically because he believed strength and ruthlessness were the only protection against a world designed to crush the weak. He had made brutal choices and justified them through the mathematics of survival, but standing in the royal chamber looking at a king who had rationalized murder as statecraft, Kael finally understood what he had become. Not a protector of the North, not a defender against corruption, just another monster wearing a different mask. The realization should have broken him, should have sent him to his knees accepting whatever execution the council had planned. But instead it clarified something that had been obscured by 5 years of strategic thinking and political calculation. He had been fighting the wrong war. The problem was not corrupt individuals who needed to be exposed and replaced. The problem was a system that rewarded corruption and punished integrity. That made monsters of good men and called it pragmatism. That sacrificed truth on the altar of stability until nothing remained except the hollow machinery of oppression. "You cannot reform this," Kael said quietly. "You cannot fix a kingdom built on the principle that survival excuses any crime. It has to burn." Guards grabbed his arms, but he did not resist, just kept his gaze locked on the king. "Your Majesty, you authorized evil because you feared chaos, but you created something worse than chaos. You created a kingdom where honesty gets you killed and lies become official policy, where fathers die in prison and daughters are hunted for demanding justice. That is not stability. That is slow death disguised as governance." Chancellor Mordrin stepped forward. "Enough philosophy. Guards, remove these criminals and prepare them for immediate execution, public this time. We want the entire kingdom to witness what happens to people who challenge legitimate authority." The guards hauled Kael toward the door. He looked back once and saw Serafina standing alone in the center of the chamber, her broken arm hanging useless, her face carrying the kind of devastation that came from watching your entire worldview collapse in real time. Their eyes met, and he saw something there that cut deeper than any blade. Not forgiveness, not even understanding, just acknowledgement that they had both been fighting for a kingdom that did not deserve saving. Then the doors closed and they were separated. The guards dragged Kael through corridors that blurred together into impressions of marble and torchlight and faces watching with expressions ranging from satisfaction to pity. News of his capture had already spread through the palace. The Beast Duke finally broken, the rebel finally crushed, justice finally served. Except there was no justice here, just power protecting itself through violence and calling it law. They threw him in a cell identical to the one he had occupied before his first attempted execution. Same polished wood, same elegant bars, same comfortable bed designed to make you hope right up until the moment they killed you. Kael sat in the darkness and tried to find some scrap of meaning in everything that had happened. 30 soldiers dead. Serafina's team wiped out. Years of investigation leading nowhere except confirmation that the corruption went all the way to the throne itself. And tomorrow he would die having accomplished nothing except proving that idealism was just another word for suicide in a world run by pragmatic monsters. The cell door opened hours later and Serafina was pushed inside. Her broken arm had been roughly splinted, but she moved like someone operating on pure willpower with nothing left in reserve. The guards locked the door behind her and left them alone. They sat in silence for a long time. Two people who had fought beside each other, betrayed each other, and ultimately lost everything together. The weight of that shared destruction filled the cell like a physical presence. "I am sorry," Kael said finally, "for confessing, for choosing your life over the mission, for believing we could actually win against a system this corrupt." Serafina leaned her head back against the stone wall. "I am sorry too, for blaming you for being human, for expecting you to be the perfect monster who never broke under pressure, for thinking revenge would somehow heal the wound my father's death created." "They're going to execute us tomorrow," Kael said. "I know. Does it bother you? Dying for nothing?" Serafina considered the question. "We did not die for nothing. We died trying. That has to count for something." "Does it?" Kael asked. "Because from where I sit, trying and failing looks identical to never trying at all. The kingdom remains corrupt. The council remains in power. The king remains complicit. Nothing changes except we add 2 more names to the casualty list." "My father believed that bearing witness mattered," Serafina said quietly. "That speaking truth even when no one listened was still valuable because it created a record. Proof that not everyone accepted the lies. Not everyone bent to the system. And what good is that record when the people maintaining it are dead?" "Maybe none," she admitted. "Or maybe someday someone else picks up where we left off, finds our story and realizes they are not alone in seeing the corruption. Uses what we discovered to fuel their own resistance." Kael laughed bitterly. "You are an optimist, Lady Vale. Even now, hours before execution, you think our deaths will inspire future rebellion. I think our deaths will prove that some people still believed in something beyond survival," she said. "And in a kingdom where everyone has learned to kneel, that is revolutionary enough." They fell silent again. Outside, the palace prepared for another public execution, another demonstration that power crushed anyone who challenged its authority. The machinery of state violence grinding forward with institutional efficiency. "Tell me something," Serafina said. "If you could go back to the moment they brought me to Ravenspire in chains, knowing everything that was coming, would you still help me investigate the council?" Kael thought about it, about the months of partnership and growing trust, about watching her transform from a broken prisoner into someone dangerous enough to blow up the council chambers, about choosing her life over the mission and destroying everything they had built. "Yes," he said. "Even knowing we lose, even knowing it costs everything. Because the alternative was staying isolated in my fortress, becoming more monstrous every day, until I forgot why I was fighting in the first place." She reached out with her good hand and took his. The gesture was simple but carried weight that words could not express. Forgiveness, maybe. Or just recognition that they had both done their best in a situation designed to destroy them. "For what it is worth," she said, "you became less monstrous, not more. You just thought choosing love over power made you weak, and now we die because of it." "No," Serafina corrected. "We die because the kingdom is broken beyond repair. Your choice to save me did not cause that, it just exposed it." They sat holding hands in the cell while time counted down toward their execution. There was no rescue coming, no last-minute reversal, no dramatic salvation. Just 2 people waiting for death in a system that had learned to kill its idealists efficiently. Dawn came with gray light and the sound of crowds gathering in the public square. Same platform, same executioner, same performance of justice masking institutional murder. But this time there would be 2 deaths instead of 1. The Duke and the Lady. The monster and his manipulated pawn. Both dying to prove the Royal Council's narrative. Guards came for them as the first bells rang. They were chained separately and led through corridors lined with nobles watching in silence. Some looked satisfied, others troubled. Most just accepted this as the natural order of things. The powerful remained powerful by eliminating threats. That was how kingdoms survived. The public square was packed even denser than before. Kael estimated 20,000 people crammed into every available space, watching from windows and rooftops and anything that provided a view. The largest execution crowd in decades. Everyone wanted to witness the fall of the Beast Duke and the woman who had dared to love him. Except love was not quite the right word for what they had shared. Partnership came closer. Alliance forged in mutual trauma and rage. Two broken people recognizing each other's damage and choosing to fight together rather than die alone. They were positioned on the platform side by side, both standing before the execution block while Chancellor Mordrin addressed the crowd with practiced eloquence. Duke Kael Dravenmore and Lady Seraphina Vale stand convicted of high treason against the crown, he announced. They conspired to destabilize the kingdom, murdered loyal soldiers, and attempted to assassinate members of the royal council. Their crimes demand the ultimate penalty as warning to any who would follow their treasonous path. The crowd roared approval. Kael looked out at the sea of faces and felt nothing but exhaustion. These people believed they were witnessing justice. They had no idea they were watching a kingdom devour itself one honest person at a time. "Do you have final words?" Mordrin asked, his tone making it clear he expected them to beg or confess or provide some final validation of the council's authority. Kael glanced at Seraphina. She nodded slightly.
맞아요.
He turned back to the crowd and spoke with all the authority he had cultivated ruling the North. "I was the Beast Duke for 5 years. I ruled through fear and absolute conviction that power mattered more than principle. I became a monster because I believed monsters survived while good men died. And I was right. Monsters do survive. They survive by becoming everything they once despised, by sacrificing their humanity for security, by choosing stability over justice until they forget the difference." His voice carried across the square, amplified by the acoustics and the absolute silence that had fallen over the crowd. "Standing here now, hours from death, I finally understand what I should have known from the beginning. Survival without principles is not victory. It is just slow dying with better scenery. The kingdom you love, the system you believe protects you, is corrupt from the throne down to the foundations. It murders honest men and calls it statecraft. It crushes idealism and calls it pragmatism. And it will continue doing so until there is nothing left except the machinery of oppression." Mordrin moved to silence him, but Kael kept speaking. "So here's my final testimony. I am guilty of treason against a treasonous government, guilty of conspiracy against conspirators, guilty of violence against an institution built on violence. If that makes me a criminal, then I accept the sentence. But I will die knowing I fought for something real instead of living as another comfortable monster in a kingdom of liars." The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some shouted approval. Others demanded his immediate execution. Most just stood in confused silence, trying to process words that challenged everything they had been taught about loyalty and duty. Seraphina spoke next, her voice carrying the same authority her father must have possessed when he reported corruption to a king who already knew. "My father died in prison trying to expose the truth. They called it suicide, but I saw the marks on his body from fighting. He spent his last moments struggling against men who killed him for threatening their profit margins. I came to the capital seeking justice and found only a system that had learned to murder efficiently while maintaining the appearance of law." Her gaze swept across the crowd. "You are watching my execution and calling it justice. But what you are actually witnessing is a kingdom protecting corruption by eliminating witnesses. Everyone on the royal council is complicit in embezzlement and murder. The king himself authorized their crimes, and tomorrow they will continue stealing from you while you thank them for maintaining stability." "Enough," Mordrin commanded. "Guards, proceed with the execution." The executioner moved forward, axe gleaming in the morning light. Kael was forced to kneel first, his head positioned on the block worn smooth by generations of political executions. This was it, the final moment. No escape, no reversal, just death coming fast. Kael looked sideways and met Seraphina's eyes one last time. She smiled, and it held no fear or regret, just acceptance that they had fought as hard as possible and lost to a system too corrupt to save. The axe rose. Then the bells started ringing. Not execution bells, alarm bells. the kind that signaled attack or invasion or catastrophic emergency. The crowd's attention fragmented as people looked toward the palace, where smoke was suddenly billowing from multiple windows. Explosion ripped through the eastern wing, then another from the Treasury building, then a third from the council chambers that had supposedly already been destroyed. The entire government quarter was erupting into flames simultaneously. Guards on the platform hesitated, looking between the executions they were ordered to complete and the disaster unfolding behind them. Mordrin's face went pale as he realized what was happening. Someone had finished what Serafina started. Someone had planted enough explosives throughout the palace to turn the entire political infrastructure into an inferno. In the chaos, Theron emerged from the crowd with the surviving Ravenspire soldiers. They hit the platform hard, cutting through confused guards, creating a corridor of violence that led away from the execution blocks. "My lord," Theron shouted, "now!" Kael did not hesitate. He rolled away from the executioner's axe, chains rattling, and let his soldiers pull him toward freedom. Serafina was dragged along beside him, both of them stumbling through smoke and chaos while the crowd scattered in panic. They made it 3 blocks before Kael understood what had actually happened. Theron had not just created a diversion, the captain had used their infiltration of the palace to plant explosives in every critical government building. He had turned the entire administrative heart of the kingdom into kindling and ignited it during the execution when every important official would be distracted. It was not a rescue. It was a decapitation strike against the entire government. "How?" Kael asked as they ran. "Your network of contacts," Theron explained breathlessly. "The ones who owed you favors, the ones terrified of your retaliation. I called in every single debt simultaneously. Promised them forgiveness if they helped destroy the council chambers, treasury, and royal archives. Dozens of minor nobles working together to burn the evidence of their own corruption before it could be used against them." "You weaponized their fear of exposure," Serafina said. "I weaponized everything you built," Theron corrected. "Your intelligence network, your leverage, your reputation. The Beast Duke scared so many people that threatening them with your survival was more effective than any bribe." Behind them, the palace complex burned like a funeral pyre, consuming centuries of institutional corruption, documents turning to ash, buildings collapsing, the physical infrastructure of governance being destroyed faster than it could be salvaged. But the cost was staggering. Kael could hear screaming from the direction of the fires, see smoke billowing across the capital, innocent servants and clerks dying alongside corrupt counselors because Theron's plan made no distinction between guilty and bystanders. "How many people just died?" Kael asked. "Hundreds," Theron admitted. "Maybe thousands before the fires burn out. But the alternative was watching you and Lady Vale executed while the council continued operating. I chose your lives over theirs." And there it was again. The terrible calculus that justified atrocity through strategic necessity. Theron had made exactly the kind of choice Kael would have made 5 years ago, sacrificed innocence to achieve objectives. Chosen victory over morality. Except Kael was no longer the man who made those choices without cost. "Stop," he commanded. The group halted in an alley 3 blocks from the burning palace. Soldiers looked at him in confusion. Serafina watched with an expression that suggested she knew what was coming. "We cannot run," Kael said. "Not like this. Not having just murdered hundreds of people to save our own lives." "My lord," Theron started, "there is no other option. If we stay, we die." "Then we die," Kael said, "because I am done choosing survival over humanity, done justifying evil through strategic thinking. The Royal Council operated that way, and it made them monsters. I will not become what I was fighting just to live a few more days." "You want to surrender?" one of the soldiers asked in disbelief. "I want to stop running from consequences," Kael corrected. "We destroyed the government, killed hundreds, created chaos that will ripple through the kingdom for years. We do not get to walk away from that pretending we were heroes." Serafina stepped forward. "He is right. My father died trying to expose corruption through proper channels. We just burned down the entire system because we could not win following rules. That makes us terrorists, not revolutionaries. So we turn ourselves in," another soldier said. "Let them execute us for crimes we actually committed this time." "No," Kael said. "We make it mean something. We stand in front of whatever authority emerges from this disaster and confess everything. The council's corruption, the king's complicity, our own crimes. We force them to acknowledge truth, even if it costs us our lives. That is suicide. Theron said flatly. Yes, Kale agreed, but it is honest suicide. And after 5 years of lying to survive, I would rather die telling truth. The captain stared at him for a long moment. Then, against every tactical instinct, he smiled. It has been an honor serving you, my lord, even when you make terrible decisions. They walked back toward the burning palace together, not running, not hiding, just moving with deliberate purpose toward whatever judgment awaited them. Behind them, the fires continued burning, consuming the physical evidence of corruption, but leaving the truth intact in the minds of everyone who had witnessed the destruction. The royal guard found them 2 blocks from the palace. An entire company surrounded them with weapons drawn, ready to cut down the fugitives who had destroyed the government's heart. But the captain leading them did not immediately attack. He just stood there looking at Kael with an expression that mixed rage and confusion and something that might have been respect. Duke Dravenmore, the captain said, you are under arrest for terrorism, murder, and destruction of crown property. I know, Kael replied, and I surrender willingly on the condition that Lady Vale and I are granted opportunity to testify publicly about the Royal Council's corruption before our execution. You are in no position to negotiate conditions. I am in the perfect position, Kael corrected. You can execute us quietly and turn us into martyrs whose story grows more powerful with every retelling. Or you can give us a public platform to confess everything and let the kingdom decide for itself who the real criminals are. The captain hesitated. Behind him, the palace continued burning. Around them, the capital descended into chaos as citizens realized their government was literally collapsing. The entire kingdom was balanced on a knife edge between revolution and authoritarian crackdown. And Kael was offering a third path, truth, regardless of consequences. The captain made his decision. You will testify, both of you, and then you will hang for what you have done. Agreed, Kael said. They were taken into custody but not thrown in cells. Instead, they were held in the palace guard barracks, while emergency councils formed to decide how to govern a kingdom whose administrative center had just been destroyed. King Aldrich had survived the fires but was too sick and too damaged politically to maintain authority. The royal council was scattered. With 3 members dead in the explosions and the rest facing accusations they could no longer suppress. A provisional government formed from military commanders and minor nobles who had not been implicated in the corruption. And their first official act was scheduling a public tribunal where Duke Kael Dravenmore and Lady Seraphina Vale would testify about everything that had led to the palace burning. The tribunal convened 3 days after the fires in a theater converted into a temporary courtroom. Thousands packed the space, while even more gathered outside listening to speakers relay the proceedings. This was not a trial. It was a national reckoning. Kael stood before the assembled authorities and told everything. The royal council's embezzlement, the king's complicity, Lord Vale's murder, the evidence they had collected and the desperate measures taken when proper channels failed. He did not excuse his own crimes or pretend the deaths caused by Theron's explosives were justified. He just spoke truth and let the consequences fall wherever they landed. Seraphina testified next, her voice carrying across the theater with the same unwavering honesty her father must have possessed. She detailed her imprisonment, the manipulation of her trial, the systematic destruction of anyone who threatened the council's power. And she did not shy away from confessing her own role in the violence that followed. When they finished, the theater sat in absolute silence. Then one person started clapping. Then another. Then hundreds. Not because they approved of the terrorism or the deaths, but because for the first time in decades, someone had told truth in public without caring about the political consequences. The provisional government deliberated for 2 hours before delivering their judgment. Duke Kael Dravenmore and Lady Seraphina Vale were guilty of terrorism, murder, and destruction of government property. The sentence was death. But they were also credible witnesses to institutional corruption that had operated with royal approval for over a decade. Their testimony would be entered into official record. Investigations would be opened into every surviving member of the royal council. Financial records would be audited. And the kingdom would begin the painful process of acknowledging that its government had been fundamentally broken. Kael listened to the judgment and felt something close to peace. He had failed to save the kingdom through strategic brilliance, had failed to destroy corruption through evidence and proper procedure. But he had succeeded in forcing truth into the open where it could no longer be suppressed. Sometimes that was all you could accomplish. Bear witness, speak honestly. Let your death mean something beyond just adding another name to the casualty list. The execution was scheduled for the following dawn. Kael spent his final night in a cell with Serafina. They talked about everything and nothing, about her father and his father and all the people who had died fighting the same war against corruption, about whether their actions would actually change anything or just create different monsters to replace the old ones. In the hours before dawn, Serafina fell asleep with her head resting against Kael's shoulder. He sat awake listening to her breathe and trying to reconcile everything he had learned about power and principle. The Beast Duke had believed strength and ruthlessness were the only protection against a hostile world. That mercy was weakness, that survival justified any cost. But dying beside someone who had fought beside him, betrayed him, forgiven him, and ultimately chosen truth over survival alongside him, Kael finally understood what actual strength looked like. It was not the ability to crush enemies. It was the courage to remain human even when being monstrous was easier and safer. It was choosing principles over survival when survival required abandoning everything that made you worth saving. Dawn came too quickly. They were led to the execution platform through streets lined with thousands of citizens, some throwing stones, some weeping, most just watching in silence as two people who had tried to burn down corruption walked calmly toward their deaths. Kael mounted the steps and looked out at the crowd one final time. The kingdom was broken, would probably remain broken for generations. But at least now people knew the truth. At least the lie of benevolent governance had been exposed. That had to be enough. Serafina stood beside him, her hand finding his for a final moment of connection. No words, just acknowledgement that they had fought together until the very end. The executioner approached. Kael closed his eyes and thought about his father hanging from castle walls for crimes he did not commit, about Lord Vale dying in prison trying to expose truth, about every person who had been crushed by a system that valued power over justice. He had not saved them, had not even saved himself, but he had refused to die silently, had refused to let corruption operate without consequence. And sometimes bearing witness was the only victory available. The axe fell. Darkness came. And in the silence that followed, the kingdom began the slow, painful work of deciding what came next. Years later, historians would debate whether Duke Kael Dravenmore was a hero or a terrorist, whether his actions had sparked necessary reform or just replaced one corrupt system with another. The truth, as always, was more complicated than either narrative allowed. Ravenspire Keep remained standing on its cliffs overlooking the northern sea. The fortress that had housed the Beast Duke became a memorial to everyone who had died fighting the Royal Council's corruption. Visitors came from across the kingdom to see the place where a monster had learned to be human again. The provisional government eventually stabilized into something resembling functional democracy. Not perfect, still corrupt in places, but fundamentally different from the authoritarian system that had murdered Lord Vale and justified it as statecraft. New laws were enacted limiting executive power. Financial transparency became mandatory. Witnesses received protection instead of prison sentences. None of it would have happened without Kael and Serafina forcing truth into the open through the most destructive method imaginable. Their graves were placed side by side in Ravenspire's courtyard, simple markers bearing no titles or honorifics, just names and a single inscription that had been found in Kael's final letter to Theron. Power could seize a kingdom, but only truth could free it. The words became a rallying cry for reformers across the realm, a reminder that sometimes the price of justice was everything you had and everyone you loved, and that some people were willing to pay it anyway. Because in the end, the most dangerous thing about Duke Kael Dravenmore was never his violence or his ruthlessness or his strategic brilliance. It was his refusal to survive as a comfortable monster when dying as an honest man was still possible. That choice, more than any battle or political maneuver, defined his legacy and challenged everyone who came after to ask themselves the same terrible question. What are you willing to become to survive? And what are you willing to sacrifice to remain human? The answers to those questions would shape the kingdom for generations. But they began with a duke and a lady standing on an execution platform, choosing truth over survival and principle over power. And that choice, however brutal and costly, was the beginning of something that might eventually become justice. Or at least the hope that justice was still possible in a world that had learned to crush it so efficiently. That hope was all they had to offer, and somehow, impossibly, it was enough.